Head back home, you penniless, unemployed hag. What's the scam with you tagging along on this trip, gratis? My disappointment in my family was as predictable as ever. Well, I'll give them a taste of their own medicine. While reveling in some solitary moments away from their company, I resolved to take matters into my own hands. Just then, my brother's voice chimed in on the phone. Hey, what's going on, sis? What have you done? My name's Lucy, a 30-year-old office worker, and for the past 3 years, I've been with someone special, Alan. He's a genuine gentleman who not only treats me with kindness but deeply cares for me. We first crossed paths in college. He was my senior, and I often turned to him for advice on work or personal matters. He always listened intently and offered wise counsel. As we transitioned into the working world, we kept in touch, meeting regularly. Then, one day, he confessed his feelings and we embarked on a relationship. Since then, our journey together has been blissful, filled with shared moments and dreams of a future together. Then came the day when Alan popped the question, Lucy, I want to spend the rest of my life by your side. Will you marry me? Yes, we both agreed, and the decision to tie the knot was made. Swiftly, we shared the news with our families. Nice to meet you, I'm Lucy. I introduced myself warmly. Oh, so we finally meet. Alan has talked a lot about you, his mother exclaimed with a smile. You're just as lovely as he described, I replied, feeling the hint of shyness. Don't sell yourself short. Come on in, make yourself at home, she insisted kindly. Thank you, I said gratefully. Alan had lost his father a few years back, leaving only his mother in the family home. I was anxious about meeting her, but she greeted me with open arms. Over tea and snacks, we engaged in a delightful conversation, easing any worries I had about fitting into the family. Lucy, you're truly a remarkable person. I couldn't be happier that you'll be joining Alan as his wife, my mother-in-law to be praised, her kind words catching me off guard and leaving me slightly flustered. I'm eagerly anticipating your wedding. Take care, Mom. Thank you for today, I replied, bidding her farewell. As our meeting concluded on a positive note, a sense of relief washed over me. However, the thought of introducing Alan to my own family immediately dampened my spirits. The truth is, I've never been particularly fond of my own family. The root of this issue stems from the way my parents treated me throughout my childhood. Both of them were star athletes. Mom excelled in track and field, while Dad dominated the soccer field. Their athletic prowess earned them scholarships to college, and naturally, they expected the same level of athletic achievement from their children. Unfortunately, I didn't possess the same athletic talents they did. Despite their efforts to nurture my sporting abilities by enrolling me in various activities like basketball, swimming, table tennis, and even figure skating, I remained average at best. It was evident that my parents were disappointed by my lack of athletic prowess. Then came the arrival of my younger brother Kyle. With aspirations of having a son, my parents eagerly enrolled him in sports as well. It turned out that Kyle had a natural talent for soccer. When the local youth coach praised his abilities, my parents were overjoyed and redirected all their attention towards him. Kyle is truly exceptional. He's something truly special, they would gush, their words implying my inadequacy. It seemed as though it was nothing more than a disappointment in their eyes. They lavished Kyle with attention and neglected me, even as I progressed through middle and high school. While I dedicated myself to my studies and excelled academically, they dismissed my achievements, claiming that academic success held no real value. When I expressed my desire to attend college, they brushed it off, citing financial constraints, so I relied on scholarships to pursue higher education. Meanwhile, Kyle continued to thrive in soccer, earning himself a scholarship to high school. My parents couldn't contain their excitement. He's destined for greatness. We'll do anything for Kyle. Growing up in the shadow of such adoration, Kyle began to look down on me. Lucy, you're such a failure and a curse. Even Mom and Dad can't stand you. If you weren't around, they could invest all their resources in me. You're just dragging us down. Kyle's hurtful words were a regular occurrence, and my parents never intervened to correct him. You truly are a burden. Spending money on you is just a waste, echoed their sentiment, further crushing my already fragile self-esteem. Despite managing to secure admission to a decent college and landing a job at a reputable company, my sense of worth remained battered, perpetually overshadowed by Kyle's accomplishments. He effortlessly earned yet another soccer scholarship for college, and my parents beamed with pride. Meanwhile, I was struggling to make ends meet. burdened by student loan debt. While Kyle continued to bask in the warmth of parental affection, living at home, pursuing his education, and indulging in soccer, the road to professional success proved arduous. Eventually, Kyle's dreams of going pro fizzled out, and he had to settle for a regular job. Yet my parents remained steadfast in their pride, and Kyle continued to enjoy the comforts of home, content in his own bubble. Every Christmas when our extended family gathered, my parents insisted on my presence. They would introduce me as their disappointing daughter while lavishing praise upon Kyle, their pride and joy. But Lucy is thriving, she has a stable job, relatives would interject. No, Kyle is far more impressive. My parents would dismiss their comments, leaving me disheartened each time. It became a pattern. My family's consistent favoritism towards my brother, their disregard for my achievements. Eventually, I stopped attending these gatherings altogether. I avoided family events and hesitated to introduce my fiancé to them, knowing how they would treat him. Despite being aware of my family's attitude, Alan insisted on a family meeting. So, after years of avoidance, I made the decision to return home. I called my mom to share the news. "What? No, how have you been?" Or "It's been too long." Her response was devoid of warmth or interest, a stark reminder of how little I mattered in their eyes, even after all this time. "It's been years since you reached out. What's the matter now?" My mom's voice came through, devoid of any warmth. Well, I'm getting married, and my fiancé wants to meet the family. Could we arrange that?" I stuttered nervously. "Why bother with all that hassle? Just tie the knot and be done with it." Her response was disappointingly cold. Just as I was processing her words, Kyle's voice cut in. "Mom, who are you talking to?" he inquired. "It's Lucy. She's talking about having a family meeting because she's getting married." "Really? That sounds amusing. I'd love to see who this guy is. Let's invite them," Kyle chimed in, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Fine, if Kyle insists," my mom relented, her tone lacking enthusiasm. "All right, you can come for the meeting," she added, a hint of obligation in her voice. After overhearing their conversation, I felt a whirlwind of emotions. Despite their lukewarm invitation, I reasoned that they did express some desire to see me. So, on my next day off, I made the decision to visit my family. "Just be prepared for the worst. They might not treat you well," Alan cautioned me. "Yeah, I understand. But from that brief phone call, it sounds like you have quite the family dynamic," I replied, trying to lighten the mood. "This isn't a laughing matter. I've had my fair share of struggles with them," Alan reminded me solemnly. "I insist on meeting your family before we tie the knot. We'll keep it brief, all right?" I urged Alan as we drove to my family home. Upon arriving, we rang the doorbell, but no one answered. Resorting to my key, I let us in. As we entered the living room, I was taken aback to find my family seated on the sofa. What surprised me even more was the presence of an unfamiliar young woman. Deciding to start with a simple greeting, I spoke up. "Hello, everyone. It's been a while. This is my fiancé, Alan. Pleasure to meet you all." I introduced Alan, prompting my family's gaze to shift towards him. Well, I half expected Lucy to bring home some dull, unremarkable fellow, but you seem all right, Kyle remarked crudely, eliciting an awkward chuckle from Alan. "Kyle, who's the woman next to you? Your girlfriend?" I couldn't hide my irritation at Kyle for bringing an unexpected guest to our pre-planned family gathering. But Kyle's response caught me off guard. "She's my wife, Mia. We've been living here since we got married." He dropped the bombshell casually. "What? Wife?" My eyes widened in disbelief. "You got married?" I was stunned, the news hitting me like a ton of bricks. "Yeah, last year," Kyle confirmed, seemingly unfazed. I was left speechless, grappling with the realization that my own brother had tied the knot without even informing me. As I tried to process this revelation, my raised voice drew Mom's annoyance. "You're too nosy. It's none of your business if Kyle got married," she snapped, brushing off my concerns. I felt a mix of hurt and betrayal. Dad then turned his attention to Alan, ignoring the tension in the room. "I'm not particularly interested, but what do you do for a living?" "You're marrying Lucy, so it can't be anything impressive, but let's hear it," he remarked bluntly. Alan's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with my rising anger. As I clenched my fists in frustration, Alan gently restrained me, reminding me not to let their words get to me. "I apologize for any rudeness. Here's my card," Alan said, extending his business card to Dad. who initially regarded it with little interest. However, his expression quickly changed. "You're a lawyer," Dad exclaimed, his eyes widening in surprise. Mom, Kyle, and Maya shared in the astonishment. "Wow, that's impressive. Elizabeth, prepare some tea for our guests, would you?" "I'll handle it," Dad declared, suddenly hospitable. "A real lawyer, how fascinating," he mused as the atmosphere in the room shifted. Alan couldn't help but be taken aback by the sudden change in attitude. "I never would have guessed Lucy's fiancé was a lawyer," Kyle remarked, echoing the sentiment shared by the others. "Does that mean you make a lot of money? Maybe you can buy me a designer bag for my birthday," Maya chimed in, her audacity leaving me speechless. It was astonishing that she would make such requests to Alan upon their first meeting. Nevertheless, Alan responded with a wry smile, handling the situation with grace. "Alan, you really shouldn't be saying such things to my fiancé, especially on our first meeting," Alan responded with a wry smile, addressing me as bold comments. "We're going to be family, so let's try to get along," Mom interjected, attempting to diffuse the tension. However, I couldn't shake off the sense of unease that lingered within me. As the families gathered for a joint meeting, both my parents and Kyle's family exhibited an unusual level of enthusiasm. Even my mother-in-law appeared somewhat taken aback by their fervor. Following the meeting, I took the opportunity to apologize to my mother-in-law, only to discover that Alan had already informed her of the incident. "Don't worry about it," she reassured me with a smile, instantly alleviating my concerns. It was a moment of relief, reaffirming my belief in her genuine kindness. 2 months later, Alan and I exchanged vows, with my previously indifferent family in attendance. Surprisingly, after the wedding, they began reaching out to us more frequently. "Why don't you and Alan join us for dinner sometime? We know this wonderful restaurant," Mom's voice would chirp over the phone. I couldn't shake the suspicion that they were eyeing Alan's money, given his profession as a lawyer. But I wasn't about to fall for their scheme. "We're tied up at the moment, so we can't commit to anything right now. We'll keep you posted when we're available," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Sure, we'll be eagerly waiting. We're flexible with our schedule," Mom responded, her enthusiasm palpable. I felt a surge of disgust. It was clear they were more interested in exploiting my marriage to a wealthy man than in building a genuine relationship with me. After maintaining distance for some time, Mom called again a few months later. "When are you and Alan going to join us for dinner, Lucy?" Mom's voice dripped with false sweetness, and I could practically feel her desperation through the phone. "Sorry, Mom, we're pretty swamped," I replied curtly, already contemplating ending the call. But before I could, she dropped a bombshell. "We're planning to celebrate my half-century birthday," she continued, her tone shifting slightly. "After all, your father and I did see you through high school. It wouldn't hurt to show a little gratitude." I could feel her frustration mounting, expecting us to start treating her differently. But deep down, I couldn't deny that she had a point. After all, my parents had supported me until I graduated college, even if I'd paid my own way through it. Perhaps it was time to show a bit of gratitude. As Mom hit the big 5-0, I relented. "All right, count us in for the celebration." "Really? That's fantastic. We're actually planning a family trip, so it'll be perfect for all of us to spend time together." "A family vacation, huh?" I mused, not entirely enthusiastic about the idea. But then I realized it could be an opportunity to enjoy some quality time alone with Alan. When I brought up the idea to Alan, he was on board, so we decided to join the family trip. Mom's reaction was pure excitement. "Could you handle the reservations? I'll send you a bunch of URLs for hotels and plans," Mom requested eagerly. "What?" Mom inundated me with URLs, all pointing to luxury hotels and high-end restaurants. I couldn't help but feel irked by their extravagance, but I reasoned that this might be a one-time indulgence. Reluctantly, I checked out the links and proceeded with the bookings. When I called Mom to confirm the reservations, her joy was palpable. "I can't wait, thank you so much," she exclaimed, brimming with excitement. At last, the long-awaited day for our half-century family vacation had arrived, and our destination was sunny Florida. Excitement filled the air as we boarded the plane, with everyone in high spirits. Both my parents and Kyle, along with his partner, seemed to be thoroughly enjoying themselves. On touchdown, Alan and I made it clear to the family that we intended to explore on our own. Despite their attempts to persuade us to join them for souvenir shopping, we managed to gracefully evade the invitation and set off on our own adventure. We arranged to reconvene for dinner at the upscale restaurant we had reserved. As Alan and I wandered the city, taking in its sights and sounds, time seemed to slip away effortlessly. Eventually, we made our way to the fancy restaurant where our parents and Kyle's family were already waiting. "You're late," Mom chimed in sharply as we approached. "Well, we still have 10 minutes until our reservation," Alan calmly pointed out. Suddenly, their demeanor shifted. "We were talking to you," Mom retorted curtly. "What? Our business is with Alan, not you." Mom's words cut through the air, her tone sharp and dismissive. "Thank you for covering the expenses for this lavish dinner and hotel stay," Dad added, his gratitude directed solely towards Alan. Alan looked bewildered, while Kyle and the others turned their attention to me. "You're finished here, Lucy. You don't deserve any of this. You're nothing but a burden," Kyle spat out angrily. "What are you even talking about?" I tried to reason, but their voices rose in unison. "Get out of here, you jobless loser. You have no place on this trip," they berated me, their words dripping with disdain. Disgusted by my family's treatment, I realized their intentions to exclude me from the beginning. "So this is how it's going to be," I thought to myself, feeling a surge of determination. "You'll regret this." Without another word, I leaned in close to Alan and whispered, "Fine, I'll leave now." Our parents and Kyle's family looked smug as they entered the restaurant with Alan, I remarked bitterly. Quickly, I made alternate arrangements. Thankfully, a decent hotel had a last-minute cancellation, so I secured a room and checked in. Settling into a cozy lounge with a picturesque view, I indulged in a cup of coffee to soothe my frayed nerves. It wasn't long before Kyle's call interrupted my moment of peace. "What did you do, Lucy?" "Alan's gone," Kyle's voice sounded frantic. "I have no idea. You know Alan, he's usually clueless but sharp when it counts," I replied, trying to keep my tone steady. "Sure, but this is different. I told him I'm staying at another hotel, so he should join me," Kyle explained. "Whenever you're kidding, Kyle," I retorted, feeling a surge of irritation. Kyle abruptly ended the call, leaving me to ponder the situation. Soon after, Alan appeared at my hotel, a mischievous grin adorning his face. "Did it work? Were they mad?" I asked eagerly. "Yeah, they were furious. They're hopeless," Alan replied, shaking his head in disbelief. "You were going to foot the bill, and they still acted like that," I exclaimed incredulously. Even Alan was taken aback by their behavior. We brushed it off and decided to treat ourselves to a meal at the hotel's fancy restaurant. Returning to our room, we unwound and woke up feeling rejuvenated the next morning. Eager to explore, we embarked on a sightseeing adventure. Wanting to avoid traveling back with our parents, we opted to change our flight to an earlier one. While waiting for our flight, Mom's furious voice pierced through the phone. "Hello, what's going on? I thought you didn't require my assistance," I answered calmly. "What's the meaning of this? Why is the hotel bill due at checkout?" Mom demanded angrily. "That's how I made the reservation. Don't joke around," I replied, trying to maintain composure. "We can't afford $11,000 per person. If you're enjoying luxury, you should cover the expenses. Unless you want to end up in jail," Mom snapped back. "Stop it. You're so arrogant for a parasite," she spat out before ending the call. "You're the one who needs to stop. I had every intention of covering all the expenses for this trip as a gesture of gratitude for all the years you've supported me. But you ruined it by kicking me out," I asserted firmly. "Wait, you were going to pay for everything." Mom's voice wavered with disbelief. "That's exactly what I've been trying to tell you," I affirmed. "There's no way you could afford something like that," Mom countered skeptically. "Don't underestimate me. I work at the headquarters of a major corporation and hold a managerial position. I earn significantly more than Dad and have substantial savings," I explained calmly. "Really?" Mom was left speechless, but at that point, it hardly mattered. I had made my decision to sever ties completely. "I have to board the plane now, so goodbye," I stated, ending the conversation abruptly. "Wait, hold on," I muttered before swiftly ending the call and blocking all their numbers. Fortunately, they were unaware of our address or workplaces, preventing any unexpected visits. However, my Nave family made a reckless move by storming the law firm listed on Alan's business card. Their disruptive behavior led to chaos, with Kyle even causing damage to office equipment, resulting in their arrest. After indulging in an extravagant family trip, They now face the consequences of their actions, hefty damages and fines to pay. Dad and Kyle were subsequently terminated from their jobs, and now they all struggle to make ends meet with part-time employment, trapped in a cycle of poverty and constant conflict. It's a stark lesson in reaping what you sow. On the other hand, Alan and I continue to lead a contented life. I'm overjoyed to announce that I'm expecting, and we recently welcomed our beautiful daughter into the world, celebrating the momentous occasion with my supportive mother-in-law. Moving forward, I intend to cherish my true family, Alan, my mother-in-law, and our daughter, and embrace a life filled with happiness and fulfillment.
From my earliest memories, I knew I was a disappointment. Not that my parents ever said it directly, they didn't have to. The way they looked at me when I was born, hoping for their first son, and then again when my sister Kate arrived 3 years later, told me everything I needed to know. I was Jenna, their firstborn daughter, and I would never be enough. Maybe the next one will be a boy, I overheard Mom telling Dad after Kate was born. But there wasn't going to be a next one. Complications during Kate's birth meant Mom couldn't have any more children. Their dreams of having a son were put on hold, transferred to some distant future when their daughters might give them grandsons instead. Growing up in our modest suburban home, I watched as Kate quickly figured out how to wrap our parents around her little finger. She'd bat those big brown eyes of hers, and they'd melt like ice cream on a hot summer day. Meanwhile, I grew more independent, learning to rely on myself rather than chase after attention I was never going to get. Kate knew exactly what buttons to push to get what she wanted. I had everything I needed: clothes, food, shelter, education, but emotional warmth was always in short supply, at least for me. Over time, I learned to accept it, to build my own internal fortress of self-reliance. I'm going to study economics, I announced at dinner during my senior year of high school. Mom and Dad exchanged looks across the table. "Are you sure, honey?" Mom asked, her fork pausing halfway to her mouth. "That's such a technical field." Dad nodded in agreement. "What about something more suitable for a young lady? Teaching, maybe? Or nursing?" I stood my ground. "I've already been accepted to State University. My grades are good enough for a partial scholarship." "Well," Mom sighed, "I suppose it's your choice." The disappointment in her voice was familiar by now, almost comforting in its predictability. Kate, who was still in high school, smirked from across the table. "I'm thinking of studying psychology," she announced, and our parents immediately brightened. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Mom exclaimed. "You've always been so good with people." I pushed my peas around my plate, letting their voices wash over me like background noise. I'd learned long ago that fighting for their approval was a losing battle. Instead, I focused on my future, on the independence that college would bring. I met James during my sophomore year at State University. He was a senior in the economics department, and we literally bumped into each other in the library's financial section. I dropped my statistics textbook, he picked it up, and that's how our story began. "You're in Professor Martinez's macro class, right?" he asked, handing me back my book. "I've seen you asking all the smart questions." I blushed, not used to anyone noticing me in a positive way. "Yeah, that's me. The annoying one who keeps the class running late." "Not annoying at all," he smiled. "Actually, I was wondering if you'd like to grab coffee sometime? I could tell you about the upper-level courses you'll be taking next year." That coffee date turned into dinner, which turned into movie nights, which turned into us being inseparable. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen and appreciated. James didn't compare me to anyone else, he just liked me for who I was. After he graduated, James took a job at Anderson Consulting while I finished my degree. He waited for me, and the moment I graduated, we decided to move in together. We found a small apartment downtown, nothing fancy, but it was ours. "Mom, Dad, this is James," I said during his first visit to my parents' house. The change in their attitude was immediate and shocking. "Oh, James," Mom practically squealed. "We're so happy to finally meet you. Will you be joining us for Thanksgiving? Christmas? Both?" Dad clapped him on the shoulder. "Son, we've heard so much about you. Tell me about your job. Jenna says you're in finance?" The word son caught my attention. Of course, they were finally getting the son they'd always wanted, even if it was through marriage. I watched as they fawned over James, asking him about his plans for the future and when he thought he might want to settle down. Kate, who was living at home after graduating and still hadn't found a serious boyfriend, sat in the corner during these family gatherings, shooting daggers at us with her eyes. For once, I was the sister who had something she wanted, and she couldn't stand it. After a year of living together, during a quiet dinner at home, James got down on one knee and proposed. I said yes immediately, and we decided on a small, intimate wedding, despite my parents' protests about wanting something more elaborate. "It's your big day," Mom argued. "Don't you want something more special?" "This is special," I insisted. "It's exactly what we want." The ceremony was perfect, just close friends and family in a small garden venue. James and I exchanged vows, had a lovely dinner reception, and went back to our apartment as husband and wife. It felt right, starting our married life in the same place where we'd begun building our life together. The questions started almost immediately after the honeymoon. "So, when can we expect some good news?" Mom would ask, her eyes gleaming with barely concealed desperation for a grandson. "We're saving for a house first," I'd explain, again and again. "We want to be financially stable before starting a family." Dad would shake his head disapprovingly. "Your mother and I didn't have much when we started out, and we managed just fine." Every family dinner became an update on their friends' growing families. "Did you hear? The Hendersons just became grandparents again, another boy," or "the Smith's daughter just announced she's pregnant, and she's younger than you, Jenna." Finally, after 2 years of saving, James and I bought our first house. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was ours, well, ours and the bank's. The moment we signed those mortgage papers, I knew the baby questions would intensify. And they did. What I hadn't expected was Kate's announcement just 3 months later. "I'm pregnant," she declared during Sunday dinner, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "It's Mark's." Mark was her boyfriend of 6 months, a guy none of us particularly liked. The next few months were a whirlwind. Mark disappeared as soon as Kate started showing, leaving her alone and moving back in with our parents. But instead of this being a scandal or shame, my parents transformed their house into a shrine to their upcoming grandchild. When little Emily was born, you'd have thought she was royalty. My parents converted Kate's old room into a nursery, bought every baby item imaginable, and basically turned their lives upside down to help raise their granddaughter. "Isn't she perfect?" Mom would coo, rocking Emily during our visits. "Don't you just want one of your own, Jenna?" What hurt more than my parents' constant pressure was watching James with Emily. He'd get down on the floor to play with her, make silly faces, and spend hours entertaining her with stuffed animals and children's books. "James is such a natural with children," Mom would say pointedly. "He's going to make such a wonderful father." I started monitoring my cycle, taking vitamins, and doing everything the pregnancy websites recommended. Month after month, we tried. And month after month, nothing happened. Meanwhile, James spent more and more time at my parents' house, playing with Emily. "She's such a sweet kid," he'd say on our drives home. "Did you see how she's starting to walk now? And she almost said uncle today." "You're so good with her," my mother would praise him. "Just imagine how wonderful you'll be with your own children." I'd smile and nod, but inside, a knot of anxiety was growing. Why wasn't I pregnant yet? What if something was wrong? But I pushed these thoughts aside, telling myself it would happen when it was meant to happen. After a year of trying with no success, I was still trying to stay positive. These things take time, I'd tell myself. But when Mom found out we'd been actively trying for a year, she went into full panic mode. "A whole year? Jenna, something's wrong. You need to see a doctor immediately." She started forwarding me contact information for fertility specialists before I'd even left their house that day. Finally, to get everyone off my back, I made an appointment. James came with me, holding my hand in the sterile exam room as the doctor ran through her questions. Blood tests, ultrasounds, and more tests followed. Then came the day of the results. "I'm sorry," the doctor said gently, "but the tests indicate that you're infertile." The words hit me like a physical blow. James squeezed my hand, but I barely felt it. The doctor kept talking about options and treatments, but her voice seemed to come from very far away. That evening, James and I sat in our kitchen, barely touching our takeout dinner. "We can look into adoption or IVF," he said finally. "There are options." I nodded numbly, but the devastation felt complete. How could I face my family with this news? The answer came at the next family dinner. I decided to just get it over with, like ripping off a band-aid. "Mom, Dad," I said during a lull in the conversation, "I need to tell you something. I saw a specialist and I took a deep breath. I can't have children. I'm infertile." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Mom's face contorted with disgust. "Infertile?" She spat the word like it was poison. "What kind of woman can't even do the one thing she's meant to do?" Dad wouldn't even look at me. "An empty vessel," he muttered. "Just an empty flower." Kate sat there smirking, bouncing Emily on her knee. "Well, I guess we know who the real woman in the family is." I looked at James, desperate for support, but he just sat there, staring at his plate. The tears came then, hot and unstoppable. I pushed back from the table and ran out of the house, ignoring their calls behind me. After that night, I couldn't bring myself to go back to their house. But James kept going, spending time with Emily, chatting with Kate, listening to my parents. He'd come home full of stories. "Emily learned a new song today," he'd say. "You should have seen her dancing around the living room." Or, "Kate made this amazing lasagna. She's really getting good at cooking." Each word felt like a knife in my heart. I'd lie awake at night, listening to James's steady breathing beside me, wondering if he resented me for not being able to give him children. The guilt ate at me constantly, made worse every time he came home from another visit to my parents' house, with that wistful look in his eyes after playing with Emily. It was a regular Tuesday when my world fell apart. I came home early from work, my arms full of Chinese takeout, James's favorite. But the house was empty and dark. His car wasn't in the driveway, which wasn't unusual, but something felt off. I called his cell. No answer. Called again. Straight to voicemail. Then my phone buzzed, a notification from Instagram. Kate Thompson posted a new photo. I usually ignored her posts, but something made me click this time. My stomach dropped as the image loaded, James sitting on my parents' couch, Emily in his lap, and Kate pressed against his side, all three of them grinning at the camera. The caption read, "Family time with my favorite people." My hands were shaking as I grabbed my car keys. The rational part of my brain tried to argue that there could be an innocent explanation, but my gut knew better. The whole drive to my parents' house, my mind raced through every interaction between James and Kate over the past year, seeing them in a horrible new light. Their driveway was full, Mom's car, Dad's truck, James's sedan. The front door was unlocked, as always. I slipped inside quietly, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst from my chest. Voices drifted from the living room. "James, you know we think of you as a son already," my mother was saying. "And you deserve to be happy. You've been so wonderful with Emily," my father added. "And Kate, well, she's young, fertile. You could have more children together. Think about it," my mother continued. "Why stay trapped in a marriage with—" She lowered her voice, but I could still hear the disgust. "A barren woman?" I couldn't breathe. This couldn't be happening. I burst into the room, making them all jump. The scene was like something from a nightmare, my parents and sister on one couch, James in Dad's armchair, Emily playing with blocks on the floor between them. One big happy family, plotting to exclude me. "What the hell is going on here?" My voice came out stronger than I felt. James at least had the decency to look ashamed, but my parents were defiant. "Jenna," Mom stood up, chin raised. We're just having an honest discussion about what's best for everyone. Best for everyone? I repeated, my voice shaking. You're trying to convince my husband to leave me for my sister. Well, someone has to think about James's future, Dad shot back. You can't give him what he wants, what he deserves. Kate can. I turned to James, waiting for him to defend our marriage, to tell them they were crazy. Instead, he stared at the floor. James? My voice cracked on his name. I'm sorry, Jenna, he said quietly. But they're right. I want children, a family. And I've developed feelings for Kate. Kate smirked, reaching out to put her hand on James's arm. Get out, you don't belong here anymore. This is my family now. I looked at each of their faces, my father's stern disapproval, my mother's cold satisfaction, Kate's triumphant smile, James's guilty avoidance. For years of marriage, a lifetime of family ties, all meaningless. Without another word, I turned and walked out. I drove home in a daze, packed a suitcase on autopilot, and left a note for James, file for divorce. I'll have my lawyer contact yours. The divorce was quick and clinical. We split everything down the middle. I found a small apartment across town and threw myself into my work, trying to forget. But social media had other plans. One morning, my coworker gasped at her phone during coffee break. Oh my God, Jenna, I'm so sorry, I forgot to unfollow your sister. She tried to hide her screen, but I'd already seen it, Kate in a massive white dress, James in a tux, my parents beaming beside them. It's fine, I said, even though it wasn't. I hope they're very happy together. A year later, another announcement popped up, welcome baby Rose. My replacement had produced the daughter they'd always wanted. James now had his perfect little family, Emily, who he'd adopted, and his new baby with Kate. I deleted all my social media accounts that day. Life has a funny way of surprising you, though. I was shopping for groceries one Saturday when my cart collided with someone else's. I am so sorry, a deep voice said. I looked up into the kindest brown eyes I'd ever seen. I'm Michael, he said, helping me pick up my scattered items. Can I buy you coffee to apologize for being a klutz? One coffee turned into dinner, dinner into dating, and suddenly I was falling in love again. But this time I was honest from the start. I need to tell you something, I said one night, 6 months into our relationship. I can't have children. I'm infertile. Michael took my hands in his. Jenna, I love you. If we want kids someday, we'll adopt. Or we won't. I just want you. We got married in a small ceremony at the courthouse, just us and a few close friends. No family drama, no expensive dress, no expectations, just love. A year into our marriage, I started feeling strange. Nauseous in the mornings, dizzy at odd times. Michael insisted I see a doctor. Mrs. Chen, the doctor said, looking at my test results. Congratulations, you're pregnant. I stared at her. That's impossible. I'm infertile, I have the tests to prove it. She smiled gently. The human body is mysterious. Sometimes, despite all odds, pregnancy occurs even in cases of diagnosed infertility. It's rare, but it happens. Michael and I cried together that night, tears of joy, of disbelief, of hope. I didn't tell my family. They'd lost the right to share in my happiness. 9 months later, I held my son in my arms. 7 pounds, 6 ounces of perfect, beautiful boy. Michael and I named him Alexander, defender of mankind. Looking at his tiny face, I felt nothing but pure love. No bitterness, no regret, no anger. Life had settled into a beautiful rhythm. Alexander was 2, Michael was the perfect father, and I had everything I'd ever wanted. We rarely ate out, preferring quiet family dinners at home, but that night Michael had gotten a promotion, so we decided to celebrate at La Maison, an upscale French restaurant downtown. That's when I saw them. At first, I thought I was imagining things. But no, there was Kate, my sister, locked in an intimate embrace with a man who definitely wasn't James. They were tucked away in a corner booth, but not well enough hidden. She was running her fingers through his hair, kissing him deeply, completely oblivious to the world around them. My hand shook as I pulled out my phone and discreetly took several photos. The lighting was dim, but the pictures were clear enough, there was no mistaking what was happening. "Jenna?" Michael touched my arm. "Are you okay? You've gone pale." I showed him the photos. "That's Kate. With someone who isn't her husband." Michael's jaw tightened. He knew our whole history, knew what Kate and James had done to me. "Are you going to send those to him?" My finger hovered over the send button. It would be so easy. One click and I could blow up their perfect little family, just like they'd blown up mine. But no, I said finally, saving the photos to a secure folder instead. I'm better than them. A year passed. Alexander was growing into a brilliant, beautiful little boy with Michael's kind eyes and my stubborn chin. We were visiting a friend who lived in my old neighborhood, something I rarely did, and decided to take advantage of the nice weather by walking to a nearby park. That's when it happened. Just our luck, as we rounded the corner by the local supermarket, there they were, Mom, Dad, Kate, and James, loading groceries into their car. They saw us at the same moment we saw them. Their initial reaction was to turn away, noses in the air, pretending we were strangers. But then their eyes fell on Alexander, who was holding my hand and chattering away about the toy truck he'd brought to play with at the park. Mom stopped dead in her tracks. Who is this?" I could have ignored them. Should have, probably. But something made me stop. "This is my son, Alexander." My voice was steady, calm. Kate let out a harsh laugh. "Oh please. We all know you can't have children. Which agency did you adopt him from?" I looked her straight in the eye, enjoying the moment. "I gave birth to him 3 years ago. No adoption agency involved." "That's impossible," Mom sputtered. "The doctors said." "The doctors were wrong," I cut her off. "It happens sometimes. Rare, but it happens. And here's the proof." I gestured to Alexander, who was watching the strangers curiously. Dad's eyes went wide. "A grandson? We have a grandson?" They moved toward us then, Mom's arms outstretched like she had every right in the world to embrace my child. I stepped in front of Alexander, protectively. "No," I said firmly. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to throw me away like garbage and then claim my son as your grandson. You lost that privilege when you betrayed me." Kate's face had turned an ugly shade of red as she watched our parents' attention focus on my son. She'd always been the favorite after I was cast aside, and she couldn't stand seeing that shift. "Oh, get over yourself, Jenna," she spat. "So you managed to pop out one kid. Big deal. I still won in the end. I got your husband, I gave him a real family. 2 beautiful daughters. Face it, I'm still better than you'll ever be." My hand was already on my phone before she finished her rant. "Speaking of family, Kate, why don't you tell everyone about your extracurricular activities?" "What are you talking about?" James asked, his eyes narrowing. I pulled up the photos from the restaurant and held out my phone. "Here's your loving wife having dinner with someone else." Though I have to say, Kate, most people don't eat their dinner companion's face. The color drained from Kate's face as James snatched the phone from my hand. Mom and Dad crowded around to look, their mouths falling open in shock. "Who is he?" James demanded, his voice shaking with rage. Kate stammered, He's just a friend from work." "Friends don't kiss like that," I observed coolly. "And they certainly don't meet in dark corners of expensive restaurants while their spouses are at home with the kids." "Kate, how could you?" Mom gasped. "After everything." "Everything what?" I couldn't help but laugh. "After you helped her steal my husband? After you threw me away because you thought I couldn't have children? Karma's quite something, isn't it?" James and Kate were now screaming at each other right there in the parking lot. "Come on, sweetie," I said to Alexander, taking his hand. "Time to go home." We left them to their chaos, my son chattering happily about the park we were heading to, completely oblivious to the nuclear explosion we'd just walked away from. A month later, the community grapevine brought me the rest of the story. James, suspicious after discovering Kate's affair, had gotten himself tested. Turned out he was the one who was infertile, had been all along. Which meant baby Rose, the daughter Kate claimed was his, couldn't possibly be. He left her immediately, refusing to pay support for either Rose or Emily. Kate moved back in with our parents, her perfect life in shambles. They all tried reaching out to me after that, calls, emails, even showing up at our house unannounced. "Please, Jenna," Mom begged through the door. "We made a terrible mistake. Let us be part of Alexander's life. He's our only grandson." "You should have thought about that before you called me an empty vessel," I replied calmly. "Actions have consequences." Michael supported my decision completely. "Family isn't about DNA," he said one night as we watched Alexander playing with his blocks. "It's about love, respect, and loyalty. They showed you none of those things." He was right, of course. Looking at my little family now, my wonderful husband who loved me regardless of whether I could have children, my miracle son who proved all the doctors wrong, our home filled with laughter and joy, I knew I had everything I needed. Sometimes the family you're born into isn't the family you're meant to have. Sometimes you have to build your own, with people who choose you back. I chose Michael, and he chose me. We chose Alexander, and he chose us right back with his first smile, his first word, his first steps. That's what real family means. And I wouldn't have it any other way. My name is Tiffany Mitchell, and I was born into what seemed like a typical middle-class family in a quiet suburban neighborhood. My parents, David and Sarah Mitchell, were absolutely obsessed with child development techniques and early learning methods. They had stacks of parenting books everywhere in our house, and Mom was always talking about some new theory she'd read about. "Sarah, don't you think we're overdoing it a bit?" I remember my dad asking one evening as Mom struggled to teach me simple arithmetic. I was barely 3. "No, David, these are crucial developmental years," Mom insisted, showing him yet another colorful flashcard. "The books say we need to start early." Looking back now, I can't help but laugh at how ordinary my development was, despite their tireless efforts. I sat up, walked, and talked right on schedule, no prodigy here. But instead of accepting that every child develops at their own pace, my parents saw me as their first failed experiment. Everything changed when my sister Jessica was born. I was 3 years old, and suddenly our house transformed into what felt like a baby genius boot camp. Mom had even taken special courses by then, determined not to make the same mistakes she thought she'd made with me. The difference in how they approached raising Jessica was stark. Where I had regular toys, Jessica had educational development tools. Where I had picture books, Jessica had cognitive enhancement materials. Every milestone became a celebration. Her first words came early, she walked before her peers, and she could solve puzzles meant for older kids. My grandparents, Peter and Eleanor Mitchell, lived just a few blocks away, and their house became my sanctuary. They treated Jessica and me exactly the same, showering us both with the same love and attention. I remember one particular Sunday afternoon when I was about 5, sitting on Grandma Eleanor's lap as she read stories to both Jessica and me. "Both of my granddaughters are perfect just the way they are," Grandma would say, giving us each a cookie. This always seemed to irritate Mom, who would purse her lips and mutter something about acknowledging exceptional talent. "Sarah," Grandma once said firmly during a family dinner, "children need love, not pressure. They're not science experiments." "Mom, you don't understand modern parenting," Dad jumped to Mom's defense. "Jessica shows real promise. We need to nurture that." I sat there, pushing peas around my plate, already understanding that in my parents' eyes, I was just the practice run, the rough draft before they created their masterpiece. Elementary school was a pretty normal experience for me. I wasn't at the top of my class, but I wasn't at the bottom either. I made friends, did my homework, and generally enjoyed being a regular kid. My report cards were filled with B's and the occasional A, which I thought was perfectly fine. My parents, however, barely glanced at them. Then came the day Jessica started school. But unlike me, who went to our local public school, my sister got a different treatment entirely. "We've enrolled Jessica in the Wellington Academy for Gifted Children," Mom announced proudly at dinner one evening. They rarely accept children so young, but they were very impressed with her test scores. I remember choking on my milk. Wellington was that fancy private school across town, the one with the huge campus and Olympic-sized swimming pool. The tuition there cost more than a car. The spending didn't stop there. Every time Jessica complained about the workload or threw a tantrum about homework, our parents' solution was to throw money at the problem. "I don't want to do math today," Jessica would whine. "It's too hard." "Tell you what, sweetie," Mom would say. "If you finish your homework, we can go to the toy store and get that new dollhouse she wanted." It didn't take long for Jessica to figure out this game. Soon, every minor accomplishment came with a price tag. "If I get an A on this test, can I get the new iPad, or I'll do extra credit if you buy me those designer shoes." Meanwhile, I sat at our kitchen table, doing my homework alone. No rewards, no special attention. Once, I got the highest score in my class on a science project, a solar system model I spent weeks building. When I showed it to Mom, she just nodded and said, "That's nice, honey." "Oh, did you hear? Jessica got accepted into the advanced mathematics program." The final straw came when I was 13. I had just finished decorating my room, the bigger of the two kids' bedrooms, with posters of my favorite bands and some photos of me with my friends. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was my space, my sanctuary. One evening, Jessica marched into the living room where our parents were watching TV. "I want Tiffany's room," she demanded, hands on her hips. "Mine is too small for all my things, and I need more space for my study area." I looked up from my book, certain our parents would shut down this ridiculous request. Instead, Mom and Dad exchanged glances. "You know, that makes sense," Dad said. "Jessica does have a lot more equipment and educational materials." "What? No," I protested. "That's my room. I've had it since I was little." But my objections fell on deaf ears. The very next day, while I was at school, they moved all my things into Jessica's smaller room. When I came home, I found Jessica already settled in my old room, her expensive desk taking up the space where my bed used to be. "This is so unfair," I shouted, tears streaming down my face. "Life isn't fair, Tiffany," Mom said dismissively. "Your sister needs the space more than you do. Don't be selfish." I slammed the door to my new, smaller room and collapsed onto the bed that barely fit in the space. That night, as I stared at the unfamiliar ceiling, I realized something important. In this house, I would always come second. High school graduation was approaching, and I'd spent months researching colleges, writing applications, and dreaming about my future. I had decent grades and some good extracurricular activities on my resume. While I wasn't aiming for Harvard or Yale, I had my sights set on several solid state universities with strong business programs. That fateful family dinner started like any other. Grandma and Grandpa had come over for Mom's Sunday roast, and we were all seated around the dining room table. Jessica was bragging about her latest academic achievement while Mom and Dad beamed at her with pride. "So, Tiffany," Grandma Eleanor turned to me with genuine interest, "tell us about your college plans. Where are you thinking of applying?" I straightened up in my chair, excited to finally share my plans. "Well, I've been looking at State University's business program. There." "Oh, about that," Mom cut me off mid-sentence, setting down her fork with a sharp clink against the plate. "We've been meaning to discuss this with you, Tiffany. Your father and I have decided we won't be able to help with your college tuition. We need to save all our resources for Jessica's education. She's got a real shot at the Ivy League, and that's not going to be cheap." "You can't be serious." Grandpa Peter's fork clattered onto his plate. "What about Tiffany's future?" Mom sighed as if she were explaining something obvious to a small child. Look, we have to be realistic here. Jessica is gifted. She has real potential. Tiffany is ordinary. She can get a job right out of high school or maybe take some community college classes if she saves up. How dare you? Grandma's voice shook with anger. How can you dismiss your own daughter like this? Oh, please, Dad snapped, his face reddening. Let's not pretend here. Tiffany's never shown any exceptional abilities. Higher education would be wasted on her. We're just being practical. I couldn't take it anymore. The walls felt like they were closing in. Shoving my chair back, I ran from the table, tears already streaming down my face. Behind me, I could hear the continued argument, my parents' cold logic clashing with my grandparents' outrage. A gentle knock came at my door about 15 minutes later. Tiffany? Can I come in, sweetheart? It was Grandma Eleanor. I didn't answer, but she came in anyway, sitting on the edge of my bed. Her warm hand started rubbing circles on my back, just like she used to do when I was little. Your grandfather and I have made a decision, she said softly. We're going to pay for your college education. All of it. I rolled over, wiping my eyes. What? But that's too much money. Nonsense, she smiled, reaching out to brush my hair from my tear-stained face. You deserve an education just as much as anyone else. More, actually, because you've worked hard for it without any support. For the first time that evening, I felt myself smile. In that moment, something shifted inside me. I realized I didn't need my parents' approval anymore. I had people who believed in me, and more importantly, I was starting to believe in myself. College life suited me perfectly. Away from my parents' constant comparisons and criticism, I flourished in the business program. My professors praised my analytical thinking, and I discovered I had a natural talent for understanding market trends and investment strategies. Every weekend, I'd call Grandma and Grandpa to update them on my progress. I hadn't spoken to my parents since leaving for college. They hadn't tried to contact me either, which honestly made things easier. The only updates I got about them came through my grandparents, and one particular call changed everything. You won't believe what's happening with Jessica, Grandma said one evening, her voice heavy with concern. She's completely gone off the rails. You know, she got into Princeton, your parents wouldn't stop talking about it. But apparently, once she got there, away from your parents' constant supervision, she just stopped caring about school altogether. I listened as Grandma painted a picture of my perfect sister's dramatic fall from grace. Jessica, it seemed, had discovered parties, boys, and the freedom to do whatever she wanted. Her carefully cultivated image as the family genius crumbled in a matter of weeks. Your mother called me in tears yesterday, Grandma continued. The dean's office sent them a warning letter. Jessica's barely attending classes, and when she does show up, she's either late or hungover. What are Mom and Dad doing about it? Oh, they're beside themselves. They've tried everything, threatening to cut off her allowance, promising her a new car if she brings her grades up, even flying out to Princeton to talk some sense into her. But Jessica just laughs it off. The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of giving Jessica everything she wanted, my parents had created someone who didn't know how to handle responsibility. A month later, Grandma called with an update. Well, it finally happened, she said. Jessica got kicked out of Princeton. Failed almost every class, and had too many disciplinary infractions to count. I could hardly believe it. The golden child, the genius, the one who was supposed to bring glory to the family name, kicked out of college after just 1 year. She's moved back home, Grandma added. Your parents are in shock. They keep saying there must be some mistake, that the university didn't understand Jessica's special needs as a gifted student. Over the next few months, through my regular calls with my grandparents, I learned that Jessica had settled into a comfortable routine of doing absolutely nothing. She slept until noon, went out with different guys every night, and treated our parents' house like a hotel. Your father tried to get her to at least look for a job, Grandpa told me during one call. She told him that work was beneath someone of her intelligence level. I felt vindicated and pleased. And at the same time, I felt relieved that I'd escaped their suffocating expectations and found my own path. After graduation, I landed a position as a junior investment analyst at Meridian Financial, one of the most respected firms in my hometown. Grandma and Grandpa insisted I stay with them until I got settled, and I gratefully accepted. The unexpected reunion with my parents happened on a Saturday morning at Marshall's Grocery. I was comparing prices on organic tomatoes when I heard my mother's voice. "Tiffany, is that really you?" I turned to find both my parents standing there, looking older than I remembered. Mom was clutching her shopping cart like a lifeline. "We've missed you so much," Dad said, his voice unusually gentle. "Why don't you come over for dinner sometime?" Part of me wanted to decline, to remind them of how they dismissed me years ago. But curiosity won out. "Sure," I heard myself say. "When?" The dinner was surreal. The same house, the same dining room table, but everything felt different. My parents couldn't stop praising my job at Meridian. "Investment analyst. At such a prestigious firm," Mom kept saying. "We're so proud of you, honey. James Wilson told me they only hire the best and brightest at Meridian." I could see Jessica's knuckles turning white around her fork. She'd just quit another retail job, her third that year. Over the next few years, I worked my way up at Meridian. Each promotion came with new responsibilities and challenges, which I tackled head-on. My parents started inviting me to regular family dinners, and I accepted occasionally, maintaining a careful distance while allowing them back into my life. Jessica continued her pattern of short-lived jobs and longer periods of unemployment, never leaving our parents' house. She'd work as a waitress for a few months, then quit because it was beneath her. She'd try reception work, then leave because it was too boring. Everything changed again at one of our family gatherings. Jessica burst through the front door, dragging along a tall, well-dressed man in his 30s. "Everyone, this is Charles," she announced triumphantly. "My boyfriend." Charles was polite and well-spoken, clearly from money. Jessica spent the entire evening shooting smug looks my way. "See," she finally said during dinner, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "I bet you didn't expect me to find someone before you did, Miss Career Woman." I just shrugged and took another bite of Mom's pot roast. Jessica's attempt to get under my skin felt childish, especially given everything I'd achieved. My parents, however, were completely smitten with Charles. They hung on his every word about his family's real estate empire and his private school education. When he left that evening, promising to take Jessica to some fancy restaurant the following weekend, Mom pulled me aside. "Isn't it wonderful?" she whispered excitedly. "Charles comes from such a good family. They own half the commercial properties downtown. Jessica's finally found her path to success." I didn't bother pointing out that dating a rich man wasn't exactly a career achievement. Some things never changed. My big break at Meridian Financial came when I spotted a critical error in one of our major investment portfolios. The senior analysts had overlooked a pattern of high-risk investments that could have cost our clients millions. I stayed up 3 nights straight, analyzing data and preparing a comprehensive report. "Ms. Mitchell, this is remarkable," Mr. Davidson, our CEO, said during the emergency meeting I'd called. "How did you catch this?" "I noticed inconsistencies in the risk assessment models," I explained, walking them through my findings. "If we redistribute these investments now, we can not only avoid losses, but potentially increase returns by 12%. My strategy worked better than anyone expected. Within 6 months, the restructured portfolio showed a 15% increase in returns. Clients were thrilled, and Meridian's reputation soared. I followed this success by developing a new investment algorithm that helped identify emerging market opportunities before our competitors. Then came the day that changed everything. I was called into the boardroom, expecting another routine meeting. "Tiffany," Mr. Davidson began, "we're creating a new position of investment director, and we want you to fill it." I nearly dropped my coffee cup. Investment director? That would put me in charge of all investment strategies for the firm. It was a massive promotion, skipping several traditional career steps. The first people I called were Grandma and Grandpa. They were beside themselves with happiness and pride. I shared the news with my parents at our next family dinner. To my surprise, they seemed genuinely excited. "This calls for a celebration," Mom declared. "You must have a party." "I was thinking of reserving a private room at La Maison," I said, referring to an upscale restaurant downtown. "I could invite the whole family and—" "Oh, no, no," Mom interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. "You should have it here. Your father and I will help organize everything. It will be much more personal, more special. I'll invite all the relatives, order catering from that wonderful place on Oak Street." Her enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself agreeing. Over the next week, I transferred money to my mother's account for the party expenses, and she kept me updated with regular phone calls. The evening started with such promise. I arrived at my parents' house wearing my favorite black cocktail dress and pearl necklace, a graduation gift from my grandparents. The house was beautifully decorated, with fresh flowers on every surface and elegant place settings at the dining table. The caterers had outdone themselves, the aroma of gourmet food filled the air. Family members were already there, mingling in small groups. My grandparents gave me warm hugs, Aunt Susan kissed my cheek, Uncle Robert patted my shoulder. Jessica was holding court in the living room, wearing a stunning blue designer dress, with Charles by her side in an expensive suit. Once all the guests had arrived, we gathered around the large dining table. I stood up, champagne glass in hand, ready to make my announcement. "I'd like to thank everyone for coming tonight," I began. "Oh, sweetie, let me." Mom jumped up, cutting me off mid-sentence. Her voice was almost singing with excitement, but not for the reason I expected. "We've gathered here today," she announced, beaming at the assembled family members, "to celebrate a wonderful occasion. Our beautiful Jessica and her wonderful Charles are engaged to be married." The room erupted in gasps and congratulations. Jessica pretended to blush while showing off a massive diamond ring I hadn't noticed before. Charles smiled proudly beside her. I fell back into my chair, my champagne glass nearly slipping from my numb fingers. This couldn't be happening. The party I had paid for, my promotion celebration, had been hijacked for Jessica's engagement announcement. Looking around the table in disbelief, I saw nothing but genuine happiness on everyone's faces. Even my grandparents were smiling and congratulating the happy couple. That's when it hit me, none of them knew this was supposed to be my celebration. My parents had invited them to an engagement party, not a promotion party. My chair scraped against the floor as I stood up, anger burning in my throat. But before I could say anything, I felt my father's iron grip on my wrist. He pulled me close, his smile never wavering for the benefit of the guests, but his whispered words were ice cold. "Don't you dare make a scene," he hissed through clenched teeth. "If you ruin this for your sister, we'll cut you off completely. No inheritance, no family, nothing. Sit down and smile." I yanked my hand away from my father's grip. "No," I said, my voice cutting through the cheerful chatter. "Everyone needs to know the truth." The room fell silent. Jessica's smug smile froze on her face. "This party," I continued, my voice growing stronger, "was supposed to be celebrating my promotion to investment director at Meridian Financial. I paid for everything, the food, the decorations, all of it. My parents took my money and turned my celebration into an engagement party for Jessica without telling me." Gasps and whispers filled the room. Aunt Susan's hand flew to her mouth in shock. "That's not true." Mom tried to interrupt, her face flushing red. "Tiffany, stop this nonsense right now." "Show them the invitation, Aunt Susan," I said calmly. "What does it say?" Aunt Susan fumbled in her purse and pulled out the cream-colored card. It says join us in celebrating the engagement of Jessica Mitchell and Charles Aldridge." Charles stood up slowly, his face darkening. "You told me this was a family dinner where you'd announce our engagement." You never said anything about stealing your sister's celebration. Charlie, baby, let me explain, Jessica started, but he cut her off. No, I've seen enough. He turned to me. I'm sorry, Tiffany, I had no idea. Then he looked at Jessica. This engagement is off. I won't be part of a family that treats people this way. Look what you've done, Jessica shrieked at me as Charles walked out. You've ruined everything. You're just jealous, because I found someone and you're still alone. Jealous? I laughed incredulously. I'm the investment director of a major financial firm. I don't need to steal someone else's party or trap a rich man into marriage to feel successful. That's enough, Dad roared, standing up. You've gone too far, Tiffany. You're no longer part of this family. Consider yourself disinherited. Fine by me, I said, but before I could continue, Grandpa's voice boomed across the table. Actually, David, he said, standing up with Grandma, your inheritance won't matter much. Eleanor and I have already changed our will. Everything we have is going to Tiffany. What? Mom gasped. She's the only one in this family with any integrity, Grandma added, her voice firm. We've watched for years as you favored Jessica and pushed Tiffany aside. No more. The evening devolved into chaos after that. Relatives began leaving in embarrassed hurries, Jessica ran upstairs in tears, and my parents stood in stunned silence. I picked up my purse and walked to the door, holding my head high. Goodbye, I said, not looking back. Don't contact me again. That was 3 years ago. I haven't spoken to my parents or Jessica since that night. I heard through the grapevine that Jessica still lives at home, bitter about losing Charles and his money. My parents tried to reach out once or twice, but I blocked their numbers. My grandparents, though, remain my rocks. We have dinner together every Sunday, and they're more proud of my achievements than my parents ever were. Sometimes I think about that night and realize it was the best thing that could have happened. It freed me from seeking approval from people who would never truly give it. Last week, I was named the youngest CEO in Meridian Financial's history. When I told my grandparents, Grandma cried happy tears, and Grandpa opened a bottle of champagne he'd been saving for a special occasion. To authenticity, he toasted, and to finding your own path. I raised my glass and smiled. Finally, I was exactly where I was meant to be. Growing up as the second daughter in the Wilson family meant living in Jessica's shadow. She was 5 years older, and according to our parents, she was perfect in every way. I learned this lesson early, and it was reinforced daily in ways both big and small. When I was 6, I got an A on my math test and ran home excited to show Mom and Dad. They were in the kitchen, fawning over Jessica's new dance routine. That's nice, honey, Mom said without even looking at my paper. But look at your sister's pirouette. I stood there holding my test until the paper went limp in my hands, then quietly headed to my room. The pattern never changed. Jessica got new clothes from the mall while I got her hand-me-downs. When she wanted a phone at 12, they bought her the latest iPhone. When I turned 12, I got Jessica's old flip phone and was told to be grateful. Your sister is going places, Dad would say whenever I dared to complain. She needs these things for her future. Apparently, my future didn't need much investment. Our paternal grandparents, who lived in the fancy part of town with their swimming pool and perfectly manicured lawn, were cut from the same cloth. Every time we visited, Grandma Margaret would greet Jessica with enormous hugs and excited squeals, while I got a distracted pat on the head. Oh, Robin, she'd say, like she'd just remembered I existed. You've grown. The Christmas I was 8 really drove it home. Jessica unwrapped a brand new laptop for her schoolwork. I got a pack of notebooks and some pencils. We're being practical, Grandpa Richard explained with that condescending smile of his. This is more your speed, isn't it? But I had my own sanctuary, my mother's parents' house. Grandma Eleanor and Grandpa George lived in a modest ranch-style home on the other side of town. There, something magical happened, I was treated like I mattered. They'd actually listen when I talked. They hung my artwork on their fridge right next to Jessica's. They remembered my favorite foods and made them when I visited. Jessica hated going there. "It's so boring," she'd complain. "They don't even have a pool, and Grandma Eleanor never lets me choose what we watch on TV." So she stopped visiting, which meant I got them all to myself. While our parents were busy shuttling Jessica to her endless parade of activities, ballet 1 month, horse riding the next, then violin lessons she'd quit after 3 weeks, I spent my afternoons at Eleanor and George's. They taught me to bake cookies, helped me with homework, and never once compared me to my sister. I was 10 when my parents delivered the final verdict on my worth to the family. It came during what they called a family meeting, though it felt more like a trial where the sentence had been decided long before the proceedings began. It was a Sunday afternoon in October. All 6 adults arranged themselves around our living room, Mom and Dad standing by the fireplace, both sets of grandparents on the matching sofas, and Jessica and me perched on chairs brought in from the dining room. The atmosphere was heavy with manufactured importance. "We need to discuss something serious," Dad began, his hands clasped behind his back like a businessman about to announce layoffs. "As you know, college education isn't getting any cheaper." I watched Jessica straighten up in her chair, smoothing her perfect blonde hair. At 15, she was already practicing her future college student pose. I sat still, my hands folded in my lap, already knowing where this was going. "We've been saving since the girls were born," Mom continued, her eyes drifting to Jessica. "But with the current economy, well, we can only afford to send one of them to college." The pause that followed wasn't really a pause at all. It was just for dramatic effect, like when TV shows pretend there's suspense before announcing the obvious winner. "Jessica will be starting college in 3 years," Dad announced. "She's shown remarkable talent in so many areas. It's important we support her potential." Then he turned to me, his expression a mix of dismissal and fake sympathy. "Robin, honey, you're different. You're more suited for practical work. You don't really need college." Grandma Margaret, Dad's mother, nodded enthusiastically. "Jessica is so gifted," she gushed. "Just last week, her dance teacher said she had natural grace. She needs the best education possible." I sat there, feeling smaller with each word. Not talented enough. Not worth investing in. Not special like Jessica. The familiar message, now just officially stamped and sealed. But then something unexpected happened. Grandpa George stood up, his face red with anger. "This is absolutely unfair," he declared. "How dare you write off a 10-year-old child like this?" "George," my father started, but Grandma Eleanor cut him off. "If you won't support both your daughters equally," she said, her voice sharp as ice, "then we'll pay for Robin's college ourselves." I watched as my maternal grandparents stood up together, a united front. "Robin will have her chance at college," Grandma Eleanor announced. "We'll make sure of that." Then they walked out, leaving a stunned silence behind. Later that night, I was heading to the kitchen for water when I heard my parents talking in their bedroom. The heating vent carried their words clearly up to the hallway. "Mother's being ridiculous," Mom was saying. "Robin's not college material, she can barely keep up in regular classes. They should give us that money for Jessica's education instead. It would be wasted on Robin." "She's just not bright enough," Dad agreed. "I don't know why they're pushing this." I stood there in the dark hallway, their words washing over me like a familiar bitter rain. But somehow, it didn't hurt as much as it should have. Maybe because I'd heard it all before, or maybe because I could still hear Grandma Eleanor's fierce promise echoing in my head. The years passed, and Jessica went off to an expensive private college while I finished high school. My parents never missed a chance to brag about their perfect daughter, constantly updating everyone about Jessica's amazing college experience, her excellent grades, and her bright future ahead. I focused on my own studies, spending most of my time at Grandma Eleanor and Grandpa George's house. Their quiet support meant more than all my parents' loud praise of Jessica ever could. Then came the day that shattered my parents' perfect vision of their golden child. I was in my senior year when Jessica came home from college, fresh from graduation. I was doing homework at the kitchen table when she burst through the front door, mascara running down her face. "Mom, Dad," she sobbed. "I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was deafening. Mom dropped her coffee mug, dark liquid spreading across the kitchen floor. "Who's the father?" Dad finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. Jessica's next words sent Mom collapsing into a chair. "I don't know for sure." I watched my parents' faces as their perfect world crumbled. But it took them less than 5 minutes to reconstruct it. "Oh, sweetie," Mom rushed to hug Jessica. "It's not your fault. These things happen. We'll help you raise the baby," Dad added quickly. "You'll stay here with us." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you serious?" I said from my spot at the table. "She parties her way through college, gets pregnant, doesn't even know who the father is, and you're still making excuses for her?" "Robin," Mom snapped. "No, listen," I continued, years of frustration finally boiling over. "This is what happens when you spoil someone their entire life. When you never make them face consequences. When you—" "How dare you?" Dad thundered. "Your sister is going through a difficult time, and you're being cruel." Jessica burst into fresh tears, and Mom wrapped her arms around her protectively. "Get out," she screamed at me. "You heartless little—" I didn't wait to hear the rest. I ran upstairs, threw some clothes into a bag, and walked out. Behind me, I could hear them consoling Jessica, telling her everything would be okay, that none of this was her fault. Grandma Eleanor and Grandpa George took me in without question. I finished my senior year living with them, focusing on my college applications. My parents didn't call, didn't check on me, didn't even show up at my graduation. But I had my real family there, my grandparents, beaming with pride as I accepted my diploma. That fall, I left for college in another city, my tuition paid by my grandparents, just as they'd promised years ago. I heard through the grapevine that Jessica had given birth to a daughter and was living with our parents. They were probably still making excuses for her, still treating her like their perfect child who could do no wrong. Life had a funny way of working out. While Jessica's brilliant future had crumbled, I was thriving. After graduating college with honors, I landed a job at a top consulting firm in the city. Within 6 years, I had worked my way up to senior consultant, earned respect from my colleagues, and even managed to buy my own apartment. My routine was comfortable, challenging work during the week, weekend brunches with friends, and regular video calls with Grandma Eleanor and Grandpa George. They were proud of everything I'd accomplished, and that was all the family validation I needed. Then, on a regular Tuesday morning, my phone rang. I almost dropped my coffee when I saw Mom flash across the screen, a number I hadn't seen in almost a decade. "Robin?" Her voice sounded older, tired. "We need your help." 20 minutes later, I was sitting in my office, still trying to process what she'd told me. Jessica had run away. Again. This time with some guy she'd met at a bar. She'd left behind her 9-year-old daughter, the niece I'd never met. "Please come home," Mom had pleaded. "We need to discuss this in person." That's how I found myself driving back to my childhood home that evening. The house looked smaller than I remembered, the paint peeling around the windows. Mom and Dad had aged more than I expected, Dad's hair completely gray now, Mom's face lined with worry. They led me to the living room, the same room where they'd once declared I wasn't worth sending to college. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Jessica's been unstable," Dad began, staring at his hands. "She never kept a job for more than a few months. Different men, different apartments, she always ended up back here." Mom wiped her eyes. "We tried to help, paid her debts, watched Lucy while she worked, or said she was working. But last week, she met this man. Said he was taking her to California to become an actress." She laughed bitterly. "She packed a bag and left. Didn't even say goodbye to Lucy." We're drowning in debt, Dad admitted, his voice cracking. Credit cards, personal loans, all to keep Jessica afloat. And now? I waited for the rest, watching them squirm uncomfortably on the couch that had faded from cream to dingy beige. We want you to take Lucy, Mom finally said. Adopt her, actually. You're stable, successful, you could give her a good life. We're too old for this. We can't start over with a child. I sat there, stunned. These people who had written me off as worthless, who hadn't even come to my graduation, were now asking me to take responsibility for a child I'd never met. A child they'd helped raise for 9 years while enabling Jessica's chaos. After my parents went to bed that night, I sat in the kitchen with Lucy. She was nothing like I expected, nothing like Jessica. While my sister had been loud and demanding, Lucy was quiet and thoughtful, with serious brown eyes and a gentle smile. Do you like to read? I asked, noticing a worn copy of Harry Potter on the kitchen counter. I love it, she said softly. But Grandma says I read too much. She says I should do something useful instead. Over cups of hot chocolate, Lucy slowly opened up. She told me about her life with my parents, how Grandma sighed heavily whenever she had to make Lucy dinner, how Grandpa complained about the cost of her school supplies. They didn't hit her or starve her, but their resentment was palpable in every interaction. I spent the next week taking time off work, getting to know my niece. We went for ice cream, visited the local library, and talked about everything and nothing. Lucy was smart, kind, and remarkably resilient despite everything she'd been through. She showed me her straight-A report cards that no one had ever celebrated, her artwork that never made it to the fridge. The decision to adopt her wasn't easy. I had a career, a life I'd built carefully from scratch. But watching Lucy try to make herself smaller, quieter, less troublesome, just as I had at her age, made the choice clear. The legal process was exhausting. For months, I gathered documentation, my financial records, character references, proof of stable employment. Jessica didn't contest the termination of her parental rights, didn't even show up for the hearing. Finally, after what felt like endless paperwork and interviews, I became Lucy's legal guardian. The day we packed up her room at my parents' house, they barely looked up from their TV show. Don't forget to forward her school records, was all Mom said. Lucy flourished in our new life together. She decorated her room in our apartment with fairy lights and bookshelves, joined the school's debate team, made friends who came over for movie nights and study sessions. We developed our own little rituals, Sunday morning pancakes, evening walks in the park, marathon sessions of board games. Monthly visits to Grandma Eleanor and Grandpa George became a highlight for both of us. They doted on Lucy the way loving grandparents should, proudly displaying her artwork and report cards, remembering her favorite foods, listening to her stories with genuine interest. 5 years passed in what felt like the blink of an eye. Lucy turned 14, growing into a confident, compassionate teenager who consistently made the honor roll. My parents never called to check on her, never sent birthday cards, never asked how she was doing. But Lucy didn't seem to mind, she had found her real family. The phone call from my parents came on a Saturday morning. We'd like you and Lucy to come visit, Mom said, her voice suspiciously cheerful. We miss her. After 5 years of silence, their sudden interest set off alarm bells, but I decided to go. Lucy deserved to make her own choices about family relationships, and I didn't want to be the one standing in her way. The moment we walked through their front door, I understood why they'd called. Jessica was there, sitting on the couch like she'd never left. Lucy, she cried, jumping up and rushing toward my niece. Oh, baby, I've missed you so much. I watched Lucy's face carefully. She stood frozen, emotions flickering across her features, hope, fear, confusion, longing. Jessica wrapped her in a tearful embrace while our parents looked on approvingly. I've changed, Jessica announced, wiping her eyes. I've realized what's important. I want my daughter back. The word back hit me like a slap. Like Lucy was a borrowed sweater she'd finally decided to reclaim. I'm living in Phoenix now, Jessica continued. With Robert. He's got a great job, and we have a beautiful house. Lucy would love it there. Do you have a job? I asked, keeping my voice level. Jessica's smile faltered. Well, not right now. But Robert makes enough for all of us. And what happens if things don't work out with Robert? I pressed. What's your backup plan? Why are you being so negative? Mom snapped. Your sister is trying to do the right thing. The right thing? I laughed incredulously. The right thing would have been not abandoning her daughter for 5 years. The right thing would have been sending birthday cards, making phone calls, showing any interest at all in Lucy's life. I made mistakes, Jessica wailed. But she's my daughter. Stop being selfish, Robin, Dad cut in. You've done your part, but Lucy needs her real mother now. You can have your own children if you want to play mommy so badly. I stared at them, stunned by their cruelty. These people who had failed not one but 2 daughters, who had enabled Jessica's irresponsibility for decades, who had never once in 5 years asked how Lucy was doing in school or what her interests were, they thought they could just restart the cycle of dysfunction. Lucy isn't a toy you can pass around, I said, my voice shaking with anger. She's a person who needs stability and real love, not empty promises. Where were you when she had nightmares? When she was sick? When she won the school spelling bee? Where were any of you? You have no right, Jessica screamed. She's my child. A child you abandoned, I shot back. A child you left with people who resented her existence. A child who deserved better than all of you. Lucy, who had been silent throughout this exchange, suddenly grabbed my hand. We're leaving, I announced, squeezing her hand reassuringly. And don't you dare try to contact us. Jessica's call came exactly a week after our confrontation. When I saw her number, I almost didn't answer. But something told me to record the conversation, a habit I developed after years of dealing with difficult clients. Hey sis, she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. I've been thinking about our situation, and I think I have a solution that could work for everyone. What situation? Lucy, of course. Look, I know you've gotten attached to her, and I know you make good money at your fancy job. So here's the deal, give me $150,000, and I won't sue for custody. The phone nearly slipped from my hand. Excuse me? It's really a win-win, Jessica continued casually, as if she wasn't trying to sell her own child. You get to keep Lucy, and I get enough money to start fresh. You can afford it with your salary. Let me get this straight, I said, my voice shaking. You're trying to sell your daughter to me? Don't be so dramatic. I'm just being practical. You want Lucy, I need money. Simple business transaction. She's your child, Jessica. Not a used car. Fine, she snapped, her sweet tone vanishing. Have it your way. I'll sue for custody, and you'll never see her again. How's that for practical? She hung up, and I sat there, clutching my phone, feeling sick to my stomach. The lawsuit came 3 days later. Jessica's new boyfriend had hired her a slick lawyer who specialized in family court. The initial filing painted Jessica as a reformed mother who had overcome hardship to create a stable home for her daughter, while portraying me as a manipulative aunt who had taken advantage of a temporary situation. In court, Jessica played her role perfectly. Tears streaming down her face, she told the judge about her journey of personal growth and how she'd found stability with her new partner. She claimed I had alienated Lucy from her, that I was using her daughter to prove I was better than my sister. Our parents testified on her behalf, claiming they'd only asked me to take Lucy temporarily while Jessica got back on her feet. Dad even suggested I was emotionally manipulating Lucy to turn her against her mother. I sat there, listening to their lies, watching them spin their web of deception. But I had come prepared. Your Honor, my lawyer said, I'd like to submit an audio recording into evidence. Jessica's face went pale as her voice filled the courtroom. Give me $150,000, and I won't sue for custody. You want Lucy, I need money. Simple business transaction. The silence that followed was deafening. Jessica's lawyer stammered, trying to object, but the damage was done. Our parents sat frozen in their seats, for once without excuses to make for their perfect daughter. Then Lucy stood up. At 14, she seemed suddenly older, more confident than I'd ever seen her. I want to stay with Robin, she said clearly. My mother abandoned me. Robin chose me. She's my real family. I watched Jessica's face crumple, not in genuine grief, but in the realization that she'd lost her leverage. Our parents couldn't meet anyone's eyes. And Lucy? Lucy stood tall, finally free of the weight of her mother's shadow. The judge's decision was swift and unequivocal. Not only did I retain full custody of Lucy, but Jessica was barred from any contact with her daughter. The judge called her attempt to sell custody morally reprehensible and a clear indication of unfitness as a parent. I watched Jessica crumble in her seat as the ruling was read. Her boyfriend, who had been sitting in the back of the courtroom, stood up and walked out without a word. Later, I heard he'd left her the same day, disgusted by her attempt to sell her own child. My parents tried to catch us in the courthouse parking lot. Robin, please, Mom called out. We can work this out as a family. I turned to face them one last time. Family? You haven't been family to either of us in years. Lucy deserves better than what you did to me, what you let Jessica do to her. But where will Jessica go? Dad demanded. Robert left her. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Of course. Still worried about Jessica, even now. Some things never change. Jessica moved back in with our parents, exactly where she'd started. The golden child, still being coddled, still being excused, still failing to grow up. But this time, her failures had cost her something irreplaceable. Life went on. Lucy threw herself into her studies with renewed energy, as if the weight of uncertainty had finally lifted from her shoulders. She joined the school's newspaper team, started taking photography classes, and began talking about wanting to study journalism in college. You know what's funny? She said one evening as we were making dinner together. For years, I thought something was wrong with me because my mom kept leaving. But now I realize she was the one with the problem. She never knew how to love anyone but herself. I hugged her tight, amazed by her wisdom. You're the strongest person I know, kiddo. Grandma Eleanor and Grandpa George remained our constant support system. Sunday dinners at their house became a sacred tradition. They proudly displayed Lucy's photography in their living room, bragged about her achievements to their friends, and saved newspaper clippings of every article she wrote for the school paper. You two saved each other, Grandma Eleanor told me one day while we watched Lucy showing Grandpa George how to use his new digital camera. Just like George and I tried to save you. She was right. In trying to give Lucy the childhood I never had, I'd found the family I'd always wanted. Not the one I was born into, but the one we chose together. My parents still send occasional texts about Jessica's latest drama, but I delete them unread. Lucy hasn't heard from her mother since the court case, and she says she prefers it that way. Some bridges, once burned, should stay ashes. Last week, Lucy won first place in a statewide student journalism competition. As I watched her accept her award, I thought about that scared 9-year-old girl I'd met years ago, and the confident teenager she'd become. I thought about cycles broken, wounds healed, and love freely given. My name is Helen Anderson, and I grew up in what I thought was the ideal American family. We weren't rich at first, but we were happy. Just me, Mom, and Dad living in our modest starter home. My father, James Anderson, was the hardest working man I've ever known. He built his transportation company from the ground up, starting with just 2 trucks and gradually expanding into a successful business. I remember how he'd sometimes come home covered in grease because he insisted on maintaining the trucks himself in the early days. Mom, Sarah is her name, though I can barely bring myself to call her that anymore, worked as a restaurant manager back then. She was actually good at her job, though she'd constantly complain about it. One day, James, she'd say during dinner, pushing food around her plate, "I want to be a proper housewife. All these late nights are killing me." Dad would just smile and pat her hand, promising her that soon she'd be able to quit. And he kept that promise. When I was 9, Dad's business really took off. He landed several major contracts, and suddenly we were moving into this beautiful 2-story house in one of the nicest neighborhoods in town. I got my own room, huge and bright, with windows looking out over our backyard. I went wild with the decoration. Pale purple walls, fairy lights everywhere, and this massive bookshelf Dad built himself. He spent an entire weekend on it, cursing under his breath when he thought I couldn't hear him, but beaming with pride when it was finally finished. Mom quit her job shortly after we moved, just like she'd always wanted. Instead of taking care of the house like she'd claimed she wanted to, she was barely ever home. It was always lunch with the girls or just a quick shopping trip or my salon appointment ran late. Dad didn't seem to mind. He was too busy with his company, though he always made time for me. Every Sunday was our day, we'd go for ice cream, and he'd listen to all my stories about school and friends as if they were the most important things in the world. The last time we had ice cream together was just before I turned 11. It was a bright spring day, and Dad was telling me about one of his drivers calling in sick. "Guess I'll have to do the run myself tomorrow," he said, finishing his cone. "Just like the old days." "Can I come with you?" I asked, excited at the prospect of a road trip with Dad. He chuckled and ruffled my hair. "Not this time, princess. It's just a quick overnight trip. I'll be back before you know it." I remember hugging him extra tight that evening before bed. "Love you, Dad," I said, not knowing it would be the last time I'd ever say those words to him. The next morning, he left before dawn. Mom was still asleep, so Maria, our nanny, made his coffee and packed him a lunch. I heard him start his truck and pull out of the driveway. That was the last time I ever saw my father alive. The phone call came at 3:47 a.m. I know because I was awake, unable to sleep due to that strange feeling in my stomach. I heard Mom scream from her bedroom, followed by the sound of something breaking, probably her bedside lamp. The next few hours are a blur in my memory. Police officers in our living room. Maria holding me tight while Mom paced back and forth, talking on the phone. Words like massive collision and died instantly floating around me like dark butterflies. Dad's truck had collided with a semi that had jackknifed it across the highway. They said he didn't suffer, as if that was supposed to make it better somehow. But nothing made it better. Nothing could bring back my father. The funeral is mostly a haze in my mind. I remember staring at the closed casket, not really believing Dad was inside. Mom put on quite a show, wailing and practically throwing herself across the casket at one point. Looking back now, I realize how theatrical it all was, but at 11, I thought that's just how adults handled grief. It was at the funeral that I met Uncle Robert and Aunt Patricia for the first time. They looked so much like strangers, yet Uncle Robert had Dad's eyes, the same kind, crinkly corners when he tried to smile at me through his tears. "Helen," he said, kneeling down to my level. "I'm your father's brother. I'm so sorry we're meeting like this. Why haven't I met you before?" I remember asking, direct as only kids can be. A shadow crossed his face. "Your father and we had a disagreement many years ago. But none of that matters now. I had to come say goodbye to my little brother." After the funeral, Mom's grief evaporated like morning dew. Within weeks, she was meeting with Dad's lawyers, taking control of his company, and acting like she knew the first thing about running a transportation business. She started throwing around terms like restructuring and modernization, but it was obvious she was just making things up as she went along. I spent most of my time with Maria, who would shake her head sadly whenever Mom came home with shopping bags from expensive stores. "Your mother's spending money like water," Maria muttered one day while making my lunch. "Those poor drivers haven't been paid properly in weeks." She was right. Dad's employees started quitting one by one. These were men and women who'd worked for him for years, some since the beginning. I remembered their names, their faces, how they used to bring me little presents from their routes. Now they were leaving, unable to feed their families on promises and excuses. 6 months after Dad's death, Mom sold what was left of his company for a fraction of what it had been worth. She acted like she'd made some brilliant business decision, but everyone knew the truth: she'd run Dad's life's work into the ground. After the sale of Dad's company, Mom was rarely home, always out somewhere, and I spent most of my time with Maria. She'd started teaching me Spanish, saying it would come in handy someday. I spent a lot of time at the library after school. It was better than coming home to an empty house. Mom would breeze in late at night, sometimes smelling of wine, barely acknowledging my existence. "Oh, you're still up," she'd say, as if surprised to find me in my own home. Then she'd disappear into her room, and I wouldn't see her again until the next evening, if at all. Then came that Sunday night. I was doing homework in the kitchen when Mom burst through the door, giggling like a teenager. She wasn't alone. "Helen, sweetie," she called out, her voice thick with fake enthusiasm. "Come meet Richard." Richard was tall and wore an expensive suit that somehow still looked cheap. His smile didn't reach his eyes when he looked at me. "Helen," Mom said, clutching Richard's arm like a lifeline, "Richard and I got married last weekend. He's your new father. We're going to be a proper family again." "I already had a proper family," I said, my voice shaking. "I already have a father." Richard's fake smile disappeared. "Listen here, young lady," he said, his voice stern. "Your mother and I are married now. You need to accept that and show some respect." "You're not my father," I spat back. "You'll never be my father." "See what I mean?" Richard turned to Mom. "Difficult child. Needs discipline." But Richard moving in was just the beginning. Within a week, his mother Gloria, his sister Janet, and his 12-year-old niece Madison had all moved in too. They took over the house like an invading army, rearranging furniture and changing the decor Mom and Dad had picked out together. Mom didn't seem to mind. She and Janet became instant best friends, spending hours shopping and gossiping. Gloria took over the kitchen, complaining about Maria's cooking until Mom fired her. I lost the only person who still cared about me in that house. Then came the final blow. I came home from school one day to find Madison in my room that Dad had built the bookshelf in, my room with the purple walls and fairy lights. "What are you doing?" I demanded. "Aunt Sarah said I could have this room," Madison smirked. "It's bigger than the guest room, and I need space for all my things." "Get out," I screamed. "This is my room." "Not anymore," she taunted, throwing my books off the shelves. "Your mom says you're moving to the small room down the hall." I lost it. I lunged at Madison, and we both went down in a tangle of arms and legs. I pulled her hair while she scratched at my face, both of us screaming. Richard and Mom ran in, pulling us apart. "Helen," Mom shrieked. "How dare you? Go to your new room right now." "No. This is my room. Dad gave it to me." Richard grabbed my arm roughly. "Your father is dead," he snarled. "This is my house now, and you'll do as you're told." They locked me in the small guest room for 2 days, only letting me out for school and bathroom breaks. My books and things were piled in boxes in the corner. Dad's bookshelf was thrown out with the trash. Through the wall, I could hear Madison playing music in my old room, and Mom laughing with Janet downstairs like nothing was wrong. A few weeks after the room incident, I was heading to the bathroom late at night when I heard voices from downstairs. I crept to the top of the stairs, staying in the shadows. "The girl is becoming more difficult every day," Richard was saying. "She's disrupting our family harmony. Have you considered finding her another home?" My heart stopped. "Another home? You mean adoption?" Mom asked, and my blood ran cold at how thoughtful she sounded. "I suppose that could work. She's still young enough." "It would be better for everyone," Janet added. "Madison's afraid of her after that attack, and honestly, she doesn't fit in here anymore." I ran back to my room, buried my face in my pillow, and told myself they couldn't mean it. Mom wouldn't give me away. She couldn't. I pushed the conversation to the back of my mind, convincing myself it was just talk. 2 months later, my 13th birthday arrived. I wasn't expecting much, my birthdays hadn't been celebrated since Dad died. But to my surprise, Uncle Robert and Aunt Patricia showed up at the door. "Happy birthday, Helen," Uncle Robert said, hugging me tight. His eyes narrowed when Richard walked past, ignoring us completely. Mom had thrown together a hasty dinner, probably embarrassed that Dad's brother might judge her. The tension around the table was thick enough to cut with a knife. Then Mom cleared her throat. "Actually, Robert, Patricia, I'm glad you're here. There's something I need to discuss." Something in her tone made my stomach clench. "Helen isn't happy here," Mom continued, not looking at me. "And frankly, we're not happy either. She doesn't fit in with our new family dynamic. I've decided to put her up for adoption." The words hit me like a physical blow. The conversation I'd overheard hadn't been just talk after all. "I thought, since you and Patricia don't have children of your own," Mom continued, her voice casual as if she were discussing the weather, "you might want to take her. If not, I'll start looking for other families." The room spun. I couldn't breathe. On my birthday. She was giving me away on my birthday. Uncle Robert's chair scraped back so violently it fell over. "We'll take her," he thundered, his face red with fury. "And you, Sarah, are the most despicable excuse for a mother I've ever seen. How dare you?" Richard started to stand, but one look from Uncle Robert made him sink back into his chair. "Patricia," Uncle Robert said, his voice gentler, "help Helen pack her things. We're leaving now." Aunt Patricia wrapped an arm around my shaking shoulders and led me upstairs. We packed quickly, throwing my clothes and few remaining possessions into bags. I was crying so hard I could barely see. "It's going to be okay, sweetheart," Aunt Patricia kept whispering. "We've got you now." I walked out of that house without looking back at Mom. She didn't try to stop me, didn't try to say goodbye. The last thing I heard as Uncle Robert closed the car door was Madison asking if she could have my new room too. The transition wasn't easy at first. I'd wake up in my new room at Uncle Robert and Aunt Patricia's house, momentarily confused about where I was. But then I'd smell Aunt Patricia's coffee and bacon wafting up from the kitchen, and remember that I was home, my real home. The adoption process moved quickly. Mom signed away her rights without hesitation, which hurt at the time but eventually felt like a blessing. Uncle Robert and Aunt Patricia became Mom and Dad on paper, making official what was already true in my heart. "Helen," Uncle Robert said one morning over breakfast, "we enrolled you in Riverside Prep. It's a better school than your old one, and we think you'll like it there." I did like it there. Without the constant stress of my old home life, I started doing better in classes. My teachers noticed, and so did my new parents. They came to everything, every school play, every academic awards ceremony, every parent-teacher conference. When I joined the debate club, they sat through every competition, beaming with pride even when I lost. They encouraged me to try new things. Piano lessons, summer science camps, volunteering at the local animal shelter, they supported it all. Not just with money, but with genuine interest and involvement. The pain of my mother's rejection faded gradually, replaced by the warm certainty of being truly loved. I stopped thinking about her, stopped wondering if she ever thought about me. My new life was too full, too happy for those old hurts to matter anymore. High school graduation came, and I had the loudest cheering section in the audience, not just Uncle Robert and Aunt Patricia, but their whole extended family who had embraced me as their own. "We have something to tell you," Aunt Patricia said at my graduation dinner. "We've been saving for your college fund since the day you came to live with us." They'd put aside enough to send me to any school I chose. I picked State University's business school, planning to major in investment management. College was incredible. I threw myself into my studies, determined to make them proud. During my junior year internship at Goldman Sachs, Aunt Patricia mentioned casually that she'd run into my birth mother at the grocery store. She has a son now, Aunt Patricia said carefully, watching my reaction. They're still in your father's old house with Richard's family. I just nodded, surprised to feel nothing but mild curiosity. That life seemed like a distant dream now, happening to someone else. After graduation, I landed a job at Morgan Stanley. My starting salary made my eyes pop. It was more money than I'd ever imagined making right out of college. The day I got my first paycheck, I went straight to the jewelry store. Uncle Robert had been wearing the same worn-out watch for years, and Aunt Patricia had been eyeing a particular pearl necklace in a local shop window. When I gave them their gifts, Aunt Patricia started crying, and Uncle Robert's hands shook as he put on his new watch. "You shouldn't have spent your money on us," he protested weakly. "Who else would I spend it on?" I asked, hugging them both. "You're my parents. You're the ones who made all of this possible." 6 years flew by after college. I climbed the corporate ladder at Morgan Stanley, earning promotion after promotion until I was managing my own team. Every success felt sweeter because I could share it with Mom and Dad, as I now called Uncle Robert and Aunt Patricia without hesitation. The apartment came first, a beautiful 2-bedroom condo in a nice part of the city. Mom helped me decorate it, and Dad insisted on checking all the paperwork before I signed the mortgage. Then I met Michael. A year of dating, and he proposed during a weekend trip to the beach. I said yes, before he even finished asking the question. Mom cried when we told them, and Dad pulled Michael into a bear hug. "Welcome to the family, son," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. We threw ourselves into wedding planning. Mom and I spent weekends looking at venues and tasting cakes, while Dad and Michael bonded over budget spreadsheets and vendor contracts. Then the message arrived on Facebook. "Helen, sweetheart. I've heard about your upcoming wedding. I know it's been a long time, but I'm still your mother. I've changed, and I want to make things right. Please let me be part of your special day. I miss you so much." My hand shook as I read the message. I immediately called Mom. "I saw Sarah yesterday," Mom said quietly when I told her about the message. "At the grocery store. She didn't ask about you, not once. But when I mentioned how successful you've become, how you're getting married, well, her eyes lit up in a way I didn't like." Mom hesitated before continuing. "There's more. That niece of her husband's, Madison? She got pregnant, married some deadbeat, and moved back into the house with her husband. The whole family is constantly fighting." Sarah was complaining about money problems, rather loudly, in the middle of the store. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. So that's why she reached out. She needs money. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as memories flooded back, the room she gave away, the birthday she threw me away, the years of silence when she had every opportunity to reach out but didn't. Finally, I typed. "Sarah, let me be clear, you are not my mother. You lost that right when you gave me away on my 13th birthday. I have parents who love me unconditionally, something you never managed to do. I don't want you at my wedding. I don't want you in my life. Don't contact me again." I hit send, then immediately blocked her. My hands were steady now, my mind clear. I felt lighter somehow, as if I'd finally put down a weight I didn't know I was carrying. The morning of my wedding dawned perfect and clear. Michael's parents had rented the Mason Creek estate for the ceremony, a beautiful historic property with sprawling gardens and a restored Victorian mansion. I was in the bridal suite with Mom, putting the finishing touches on my makeup, when there was a knock at the door. "Ms. Anderson?" One of the security guards looked uncomfortable. "I'm sorry to disturb you, but there's a situation at the front gate. There are some people insisting they know you, a man, woman, and teenage boy." My stomach dropped. Somehow, I knew exactly who it was. "I'll handle this," I said, standing up carefully in my wedding dress. "Helen, you don't have to," Mom started, but I shook my head. "Yes, I do. Once and for all." I walked to the front gates, my wedding heels clicking against the cobblestone path. And there they were, Sarah, Richard, and a boy who must have been my half-brother, though he looked exactly like Madison. "Helen!" Sarah screamed when she saw me, grabbing the iron bars of the gate. "How dare you not invite your own mother to your wedding? Let us in immediately." I took a moment to really look at her. She'd aged poorly, her designer clothes were obviously last season's, her makeup too heavy, her hair desperately in need of a touch-up. Richard looked thinner, more haggard, the expensive suit replaced by something off the rack. "Richard should be the one walking you down the aisle," Sarah continued, her voice shrill. "He's your father." That made me laugh, a genuine, hearty laugh that echoed across the courtyard. My father? The man who locked me in a room for 2 days? The man who helped you throw away your own daughter? "We're family," Sarah's voice cracked. "You can't just pretend we don't exist. Look at how you're living, this fancy wedding, your big job, your expensive clothes. Meanwhile, we can barely make ends meet. We're drowning in debt, and you're here playing princess." Ah, there it was. The real reason for this dramatic appearance. "I'm not playing at anything," I said coldly. "I worked for everything I have. And let's be clear, you're not my family. You gave up that right years ago. My parents are inside that house. They're the ones who raised me, supported me, loved me unconditionally. You need our help." Sarah was practically foaming at the mouth now. "After everything we did for you." "Everything you did for me?" I cut her off. "You mean throwing me away like garbage? Taking away my room, my home, my childhood? That's what you did for me." I turned to the security guards. "These people are strangers who are trespassing. Please remove them from the property. They are not welcome here." "You can't do this," Sarah screamed as the guards moved forward. "I'm your mother." "No," I said firmly. "You're just the woman who gave birth to me. There's a difference." I turned my back on her continued screams and walked away, my head held high. When I returned to the bridal suite, Mom was waiting with a worried expression. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" I took a deep breath and smiled. "You know what? I've never been better. That chapter of my life is finally, completely closed." There was a knock at the door, and Dad poked his head in. "Ready, princess?" I looked in the mirror one last time, adjusting my veil. The woman looking back at me wasn't that scared 13-year-old girl anymore. I was strong, successful, and loved, truly loved. "I'm ready," I said, taking Dad's arm. The wedding march began to play as we approached the garden ceremony. I could see Michael waiting at the altar, beaming at me with tears in his eyes. Our guest stood, turning to watch as Dad walked me down the aisle. This was how it should be, the man who taught me to drive, who helped me with my college applications, who showed me what a father's love really means, was the one giving me away. The ceremony was perfect. Michael and I exchanged our vows under a blue sky, surrounded by flowers and the people who truly loved us. When he kissed me for the first time as my husband, our guests erupted in cheers. The reception lasted well into the night. Dad gave a touching speech that had everyone crying, then made everyone laugh with embarrassing stories from my college years. Mom danced with Michael while I danced with Dad, and I couldn't stop smiling. That was 6 months ago. Michael and I just got back from our honeymoon in Greece, and life has settled into a wonderful new normal. Sometimes people ask me about my real parents, and I tell them truthfully that my real parents are the ones who chose me, who loved me, who shaped me into the person I am today. I don't know what happened to Sarah and her family after the wedding, and honestly, I don't care. I heard through the grapevine that they had to sell Dad's old house, but that's not my concern anymore. That part of my life is over. My story isn't about being abandoned or betrayed. It's about finding your real family, the people who love you not because they have to, but because they want to. It's about choosing happiness over bitterness, forgiveness over anger, and moving forward instead of looking back. I'm Helen Anderson Mitchell now, and I couldn't be happier with the way things turned out. Every morning, I wake up next to a man who loves me completely, and every Sunday, we have dinner with the parents who chose me and never let me go. I never thought my life would turn upside down so suddenly. For 17 years, I believed I had everything figured out: a loving husband, a beautiful daughter, and what I thought was an unshakable marriage. My name is Paloma, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes the people closest to us can become strangers overnight. Back then, my life followed a comfortable routine. I worked as an accountant at a trading company, crunching numbers and balancing books. It wasn't the most exciting job, but I was good at it, and it helped provide for our family. My husband Mark was a sales representative for a large firm, which meant frequent business trips. I'd gotten used to those absences over the years, even looked forward to his returns when I'd cook all his favorite meals. Our daughter Sarah was 15, a bright teenager who filled our home with energy. She was the perfect blend of both of us, Mark's charm and my determination. We lived in a modest but comfortable apartment, and I thought we were happy. Looking back now, I realize how naive I was to think that contentment could last forever. "When are you coming back this time?" I asked Mark over the phone during one of his business trips. It was a conversation we'd had countless times before. "Should be home by Thursday," he replied, his voice distant. "Don't bother cooking anything special." That should have been my first clue. Mark had always loved my cooking, especially after being away. But lately, everything had changed subtly. He'd come home from his trips different, distracted, thoughtful, almost cold. When he'd walk through the door, instead of the warm embraces I was used to, he'd barely acknowledge the meals I'd prepared. "Are you okay?" I'd ask him repeatedly. "You seem different." "Just tired from work," he'd say, brushing off my concerns. "It's nothing." I blamed it on a midlife crisis. That's what everyone talked about, right? Men hitting their 40s and going through changes. I convinced myself it was temporary, that everything would return to normal if I just gave him time and space. Sarah noticed it too, but we both stayed quiet, hoping it would pass. "Mom, Dad seems weird lately," she mentioned one evening while we were doing dishes together. "He's just stressed with work, honey," I replied, believing my own lies. "These things happen in marriage sometimes. It'll get better." I focused on being the perfect wife, thinking that if I just tried harder, cooked better meals, kept the house more organized, everything would go back to how it was. But life has a way of shattering our illusions when we least expect it. I remember that ordinary Tuesday evening when everything changed. I had just gotten home from work and was checking my social media messages while sitting on the couch in our living room. A message from someone I didn't know. I almost ignored it, but something made me open it. "Hello, Paloma," the message read. "I think it's time we talked. I'm your husband's second wife." My hands trembled as I continued reading the message in our living room. Each word felt like a knife twisting deeper into my heart. "I've been seeing Mark for 3 years now," the message continued. "We have a beautiful son together, the child he always wanted. I'm young, beautiful, and I make him happy in ways you never could." I felt sick to my stomach, but I couldn't stop reading. Then came the screenshots, dozens of them. Messages between my husband and this woman, revealing the ugly truth about his feelings for me. "I can't stand looking at her anymore," Mark had written. "She's gotten so fat and ugly. Being in bed with her is like sleeping next to a log." Tears blurred my vision as I scrolled through more messages. "Her cooking makes me want to vomit. The whole house feels suffocating. If it wasn't for Sarah, I would have left years ago." The final message from this woman felt like the ultimate slap in the face. "If you have any pride left, Paloma, you'll let him go. He doesn't love you anymore. He hasn't for a long time." The room started spinning. I remember trying to stand up, but my legs wouldn't support me. The last thing I heard was my phone clattering to the floor before everything went black. I woke up to Sarah's worried face hovering over me. I was lying on the living room floor where I had collapsed. Mom, can you hear me?" Sarah's voice sounded distant. "I'm calling an ambulance." "No, honey, I'm fine," I tried to say, but the words came out slurred. The paramedics came anyway. They checked my vitals while I sat on our living room couch, Sarah clutching my hand. That's when Mark walked in. "What happened?" he asked, and for a moment, I saw concern in his eyes. Then he saw my phone on the coffee table, still open to those messages. "Is it true?" I whispered, looking into his eyes. "All of it?" He didn't even try to deny it. His face hardened, and in that moment, I saw the stranger he'd become. "Yes," he said flatly. "I don't love you anymore, Paloma. I haven't for a long time. I want a divorce." Sarah gasped beside me, her grip on my hand tightening. The paramedics tactfully stepped into the kitchen, giving us space. "How could you do this to Mom?" Sarah's voice shook with anger. "How could you?" "I'm sorry you had to find out this way," was all he said before walking out of the room. The next few weeks passed in a blur. I filed for divorce, going through the motions like a zombie. Sarah was my rock through it all, choosing to stay with me, despite Mark's attempts to convince her otherwise. He agreed to pay alimony for her without argument, probably the only decent thing he did during that time. Time moved forward, as it always does. Before I knew it, Sarah was graduating from high school. Mark and I split the costs of her college education equally. It seemed like the only civil interaction we had left. We both wanted the best for our daughter, even if we couldn't stand being in the same room together. Sarah chose a college in another city, and at first everything seemed fine. She called me regularly, telling me about her classes, her new friends, and life in the dorms. I lived for those calls, clinging to each detail she shared about her new life. But gradually, the calls became less frequent. When I tried reaching out, I'd get short, clipped responses. "Sorry, Mom, I'm busy right now. Can't talk, got a study group. Maybe next week, okay?" Each excuse felt like a small punch to the gut, but I told myself she was just busy with college life. Until she stopped coming home altogether. "Why don't you visit anymore, sweetie?" I'd ask during our increasingly rare phone conversations. "Just swamped with schoolwork, Mom. You know how it is." One evening, feeling particularly lonely, I decided to check her social media page. At first, nothing seemed unusual, just typical college posts about classes and friends. Then I saw it. Among her friends list was a familiar face, Mark's wife, the woman who had destroyed my marriage. My hands shaking, I clicked on her profile. What I saw made my blood run cold. There were dozens of photos of Sarah with Mark, his wife, and their son. "Happy family photos. Finally reunited," read one caption. "Complete family time," said another. In every picture, Sarah was beaming, hugging her father and his new wife like they were one big happy family. I felt sick. All those excuses, all those missed visits, she'd been with them the whole time. I took screenshots of the photos and sent them to Sarah with trembling fingers. Then I called her, my heart pounding. She answered on the third ring. Before I could say anything, she cut me off. "I was wondering when you'd find out," she said, her voice cold and unfamiliar. "Why, Sarah, why didn't you tell me?" "Because they're fun, Mom. They're rich and interesting. Dad and Lisa take me shopping, buy me designer clothes. He just got me a new car for my birthday. What do you offer? A boring apartment and your boring life?" Each word felt like a slap. "I'm your mother, Sarah. I raised you." "Yeah, well, I'm old enough to choose who I want to spend time with," she interrupted. "Lisa gives me money whenever I need it. They take me on vacations. If you don't like it, that's your problem." I sat there in my quiet apartment, staring at my phone through tears. First Mark, now Sarah. The two people I loved most in the world had both chosen the younger, prettier, richer woman over me. I curled up on my couch and sobbed, feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. I desperately needed someone to talk to. That's when I remembered my father. We hadn't spoken in 15 years, not since that terrible fight about Mark. Dad had seen right through him, had warned me repeatedly, but I wouldn't listen. "He's not right for you, Paloma," Dad had said back then. "There's something off about him." "You just don't want me to be happy," I had shouted back. "You've never supported my choices." Those were the last words we'd exchanged before I stormed out of his house, choosing Mark over my father. Now, the irony of it all made me laugh bitterly. Dad had been right all along. With trembling fingers, I dialed his number, half expecting it to be disconnected after all these years. "Hello?" His voice hadn't changed at all. "Dad?" My voice cracked. "It's Paloma. I was wondering if we could talk." "Come over right now," he said without hesitation. "I'll text you the gate code." Gate code? I wondered as I drove to my childhood home. But nothing could have prepared me for what I found. The modest house I grew up in had been transformed into a stunning estate. A security gate guarded the entrance, and the house itself had been completely renovated, at least triple its original size. Dad was waiting at the door, his hair grayer than I remembered, but his eyes just as kind. "Welcome home, sweetheart." "Dad, what, how?" I gestured at the house. He grinned proudly. "A lot can happen in 15 years. Come inside, I'll explain everything." Over coffee in what used to be our simple kitchen, now a gourmet masterpiece, Dad told me how he'd built a real estate empire from scratch. "I own about 30 properties in the city now," he said casually. "Both residential and commercial. Turns out your old man had a knack for business after all." Then it was my turn. I told him everything, about Mark's betrayal, his new wife and son, and finally, about Sarah's rejection. By the end, I was sobbing in his arms like a little girl. "I'm so sorry, Dad," I whispered. "You were right about Mark. I should have listened." "I forgave you long ago, sweetheart," he stroked my hair. "I'm just glad you're home now." After that day, I started visiting Dad regularly. It felt like making up for lost time. We talked about everything, his business, my life, our shared regrets. One evening, as we sat on his terrace overlooking the city, he made an unexpected proposal. "Come work for me," he said. "I need a good accountant for my company, someone I can trust. Someone who can learn the business from the ground up." "Dad, I don't know anything about real estate." "I'll teach you. You're smart, Paloma. You always have been. And maybe," he paused, "maybe it'll help take your mind off everything else." He was right. Learning the real estate business was exactly what I needed. Dad started teaching me everything: property valuation, contract negotiations, market analysis. For the first time in years, I felt truly excited about something. The numbers made sense to me, and the business strategies challenged my mind in ways my old accounting job never had. 3 years passed quickly as I immersed myself in learning the real estate business. I still checked Sarah's social media occasionally. That's how I learned she was graduating from college. There was no invitation for me to attend the ceremony. Instead, I received a brief message. "Don't come to graduation. Lisa says it would make her uncomfortable." The words stung, but they no longer surprised me. My daughter had made her choice clear: she wanted her father's new family, not me. The photos from her graduation showed her beaming between Mark and Lisa, her half-brother perched on Mark's shoulders. The perfect family portrait, complete without me. One evening, Dad invited me over for dinner. Something felt different. He was quieter than usual, more serious. After we finished eating, he led me to his study. "Sit down, sweetheart," he said, lowering himself carefully into his leather chair. "There's something I need to tell you." My heart clenched at his tone. "What is it, Dad?" "I've been sick for a while now," he said quietly. "Cancer. I've been fighting it for 3 years, but..." He shook his head slowly. "The doctors say I don't have much time left." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I had work to do," he smiled sadly. "I needed to prepare you to take over the business. That's why I brought you in when I did. I knew I needed time to teach you everything." I fell to my knees beside his chair, grabbing his hand. "Dad, no." "Hey now," he squeezed my hand. "Don't cry, sweetheart. We got these last 3 years together. We made peace. That's all I wanted, to know you were ready, to know we'd made things right between us. Now I can go peacefully." He was gone 3 months later. I arranged the funeral myself, trying to honor him as best I could. Through my grief, I sent Sarah a message. "Your grandfather passed away. The funeral is on Saturday. Please come." Her response came quickly and hit like a slap. Why would I care about some old man? Dad says he was nasty anyway. Not interested. I stared at the message in disbelief. The man she was dismissing had been ready to welcome her back into his life, despite her treatment of me. He had asked about her often, kept a photo of her on his desk. And now she couldn't even show basic human respect for his passing. The funeral was beautiful, attended by many of Dad's business associates and friends. Sarah's absence felt like a physical wound, but I stood tall, delivering the eulogy with all the strength I could muster. Afterward came the inheritance, the house I'd grown up in, now a mansion, the company I'd learned to run, all the properties Dad had accumulated over the years. His legacy, passed down to me. Everything Mark and Lisa flaunted their wealth with looked small in comparison. But I didn't want the mansion. Instead, I asked my assistant at the company to add it to our rental properties portfolio. I stayed in my apartment. I'd had it renovated exactly how I liked it, and it felt like home. My neighbors had become friends over the years, and the location was perfect for overseeing the business. 2 years passed quietly. The business thrived under my management, though my personal life remained empty of the one person I missed most. Then, out of nowhere, my phone rang with Sarah's number on the screen. "Mom," she said, without any greeting. "I'm getting married. We'll come by next week to talk about it. Jake wants to meet you." True to her word, Sarah arrived at my apartment the following week with her fiancé. I watched as she entered, her eyes scanning my living room with barely concealed disdain. "Still the same old place," she muttered, running a finger along my coffee table. "Still living in dullness and poverty, I see." I bit my tongue, focusing instead on Jake, who seemed uncomfortable with her comment. I busied myself preparing coffee and setting out the pastries I'd bought for their visit. "So," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "tell me about the wedding plans." Sarah straightened up, suddenly animated. "We're planning something spectacular. Only the absolute best venues in the city will do. The ceremony will be in 6 months." "That's wonderful. Have you found a place yet?" "We're looking," Jake said politely. "We want something really special." Sarah cleared her throat. "Actually, Mom, that's partly why we're here. Weddings are expensive, you know." "Of course," I nodded. "I'd be happy to help. I can contribute $10,000. Sarah rolled her eyes dramatically. "Well, I guess that's better than nothing. Lisa's already promised to handle my dress and the honeymoon." They didn't stay long after that. As the door closed behind them, I sank onto my couch, thinking about the irony of it all. With the success of Dad's, now my, company, I could easily finance 10 such weddings without blinking an eye. But Sarah's attitude, her constant digs about my poverty, her complete lack of interest in my life, it all held me back. "Let's see how this plays out," I murmured to myself. I waited for a wedding invitation, checking my mail every day. Nothing came. Finally, curiosity got the better of me, and I visited Sarah's social media page. There it was, a lengthy post about her perfect wedding venue. My eyes widened as I read the name of the ceremony hall she'd chosen. The Grand Plaza, one of the most prestigious event venues in the city. Also one of my properties. Finally, her post read, "Jake and I found the most amazing venue for our wedding. The Grand Plaza is absolutely perfect, so elegant and exclusive. Just need to sign the rental agreement and everything will be set." I couldn't help but smile. Sarah had no idea that her poor mother owned the very hall she was so excited about. She'd chosen it precisely because it represented everything she thought I couldn't provide: luxury, elegance, wealth. A week after Sarah's visit with Jake, she showed up at my apartment alone. Her expression was cold, practiced. "Mom, I need to tell you something," she said, standing in my living room, not bothering to sit down. "I won't be inviting you to the wedding." I felt my heart crack, but kept my face neutral. "Why not?" "Look around," she gestured dismissively at my apartment. "The wedding will be at this gorgeous hall. Important people will be there: Jake's family, Dad's business associates, Lisa's friends. You." She looked me up and down. "You're too simple, too poor. You wouldn't fit in." The cruelty of her words took my breath away. "But hey," she added, heading for the door, "you can still send a gift." "Money would be best. I'll text you my card details." The door clicked shut behind her. I sat there for a long moment, then picked up my phone and made a call to my office. A week later, I walked into the Grand Plaza's executive office, where Sarah, Jake, and his parents were sitting with my property manager, ready to sign the rental agreement. Sarah was beaming, practically glowing with satisfaction, until she saw me walk in. "Mom?" Her jaw dropped. "What are you doing here?" I smiled, settling into the leather chair behind the desk. "The Grand Plaza belongs to me, along with several other luxury venues in the city. In fact," I gestured around us, "this entire company that manages these properties is mine." Sarah started stuttering. But how? Where did you get all this?" "Remember when I told you your grandfather had died? When I invited you to his funeral?" I kept my voice level. "The one you called some nasty old man? He left me everything: his company, his properties, his legacy." Sarah's face went from pale to red. Then, like flipping a switch, her expression changed to one I recognized, the same calculating look she'd worn when choosing between me and Lisa years ago. "Wait, if you own all this, then I'm your only heir. You have to give me the venue for free. And a wedding gift, maybe one of your properties?" I couldn't help but laugh. "Actually, I came here personally to deny your rental application." "What?" Sarah jumped to her feet. "You can't do that." "I can and I am." I stood up, gathering my papers. "I suggest you find another venue. And Sarah?" I paused at the door. "Maybe think about whether it's worth destroying relationships with people who truly love you just because they don't seem rich or important enough." "But Mom," Sarah's screams followed me down the hallway. "You can't do this to me. I'm your daughter, Mom." I kept walking, my heels clicking against the marble floor, drowning out her protests. For the first time in years, I felt truly strong, not because of my wealth or position, but because I'd finally stood up for myself. 3 days after my confrontation with Sarah at the Grand Plaza, a gold-embossed envelope arrived in my mail. Inside was an elaborate wedding invitation, the kind that probably cost more than most people's weekly salary. My phone buzzed with a message almost simultaneously. "Mom, I'm so sorry for everything," Sarah's message read. "I've been horrible to you. I've done a lot of thinking, and I realize now how wrong I was. I'm ready to cut ties with Dad and Lisa completely. We don't need them in our lives. Please come to my wedding. Please give me another chance." I sat on my couch, holding the invitation in one hand and my phone in the other, feeling an odd sense of déjà vu. The words were perfect, the apology seemed heartfelt, but something felt off. Then it hit me, this wasn't really about me at all. "When I chose your father and Lisa," I typed back slowly, "it was because they seemed to offer something better than what I had with my dad. More money, more excitement, more status. I abandoned someone who truly loved me for superficial things." Sound familiar? I waited, watching the 3 dots appear and disappear several times, before her response came through. "That's not fair, Mom. I really want to make things right." But I could see it clearly now. When Mark and Lisa had money and status, Sarah had chosen them. Now that she knew I was wealthy, she was choosing me. The pattern was painfully obvious. I didn't respond to her message. Instead, I placed the wedding invitation in my desk drawer, next to the photo of my father. The wedding date came and went. I spent that day working in my office, looking out over the city my father had built and I now managed. Sarah posted plenty of photos online. She'd found another venue, though not quite as prestigious as the Grand Plaza. She looked beautiful in her white dress, but her smile seemed forced. Sometimes I still check her social media, watch her life unfold from a distance. She doesn't post as many photos with Mark and Lisa anymore. I suppose the shine has worn off that relationship too. Occasionally, she still sends me messages, usually when she needs something, but I've learned to let them sit unanswered. I haven't given up hope for reconciliation. After all, it took me 15 years to understand what I'd done to my father, to truly regret choosing superficial things over real love. My dad waited patiently all those years, ready to welcome me back when I finally understood. Maybe that's my role now, to wait, to be ready if Sarah ever truly understands the difference between loving someone for who they are and loving them for what they can give you. Until then, I'll keep running the company Dad left me, living in my comfortable but modest apartment, and leaving the door open for the day when Sarah might come back, not because I'm rich or poor, but because I'm her mother. Life has a funny way of teaching us who we really are. 2 years ago, if you'd told me I'd be where I am today, successful, independent, and completely estranged from my family, I would have laughed in disbelief. But here I am, and it's quite a story to tell. I'm Jillian Matthews, and back then, I was working as a manager at TradeSync Solutions, a mid-sized trading company. I was good at my job, but like many women in their late 20s, I was starting to feel that societal pressure to settle down. I had a decent career and a small circle of close friends. My family consisted of my parents, who I was close to at the time, and my older brother Marcus, who was 2 years my senior and had always been the golden child of the family. Marcus and I had grown up together in suburban Boston, sharing the typical sibling rivalry but maintaining what I thought was a solid relationship. He was always the more outgoing one, the life of the party, while I was more focused on my career and building a stable future. Our parents doted on him, and I had learned to accept that as just the way things were in our family. It was at Jenny's housewarming party, one of those gatherings where friends of friends mingle over cheap wine and supermarket cheese, where I met Tom. He was charming in that understated way that sneaks up on you, with dark brown hair that fell slightly over his eyes and a smile that made everyone feel like they were in on some private joke. We got talking about our shared love of true crime podcasts, and before I knew it, 3 hours had passed. We exchanged numbers that night, and within a week, we were texting daily. Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant downtown, where we talked until the waitstaff started giving us pointed looks about closing time. The second date turned into a third, then a fourth, and before I knew it, we were spending every weekend together. Tom was different from the other guys I dated. He seemed more mature, more focused on the future. 6 months into our relationship, we started talking about moving in together. He had a decent job in software sales, and we shared similar values about saving money and building a stable future. On our 1-year anniversary, Tom took me to the same Italian restaurant where we'd had our first date. He seemed nervous throughout dinner, fumbling with his water glass and checking his phone more often than usual. Just as our dessert arrived, he got down on one knee beside our table, pulling out a small velvet box. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear my own voice as I said yes. The ring was perfect, simple but elegant, just what I would have chosen for myself. As other diners applauded and congratulated us, I felt like I was floating on air. The weekend after our engagement, I brought Tom to meet my family. I was nervous, my parents could be pretty judgmental, and Marcus had a way of either making people feel instantly welcome or completely uncomfortable. There was usually no in-between with him. Mom opened the door before we even reached the porch. "There's my baby girl," she exclaimed, pulling me into a hug before turning to Tom. "And you must be the man who's stolen our Jillian's heart." Dad and Marcus were in the living room watching a football game. Marcus jumped up immediately, extending his hand to Tom. "So you're the guy my little sister won't shut up about," he grinned, giving Tom a firm handshake. "And you must be the infamous Marcus," Tom replied smoothly. "Gil's told me quite a bit about you too." The afternoon went better than I could have hoped. Mom insisted on showing Tom all my embarrassing childhood photos, despite my protests, while Dad grilled him about his job and future plans. To my surprise, Tom and Marcus hit it off immediately, especially when they discovered they supported the same football team. Finally, Marcus exclaimed during dinner, throwing his arm around Tom's shoulders. "I'd been dreaming of having a brother forever, but all I got was this troublemaker." He pointed at me with his fork. I stuck my tongue out at him. "Please, you wouldn't have survived without me covering for you all those times in high school." "True that, sis," he laughed, and the whole table joined in. The next few months were a whirlwind of wedding preparations. Mom took charge of the flower arrangements, Dad handled the venue negotiations, and Marcus appointed himself Tom's unofficial bachelor party planner and drinking buddy. They started meeting regularly for beers, and I was honestly thrilled to see my fiancé and my brother becoming such close friends. The wedding itself was simple, but perfect. We held it in my parents' backyard, with fairy lights strung through the trees and mason jars filled with wildflowers on the tables. Our closest friends and family were there, and when Tom kissed me after saying "I do," I truly believed this was my happily ever after. We moved into Tom's rented apartment after the honeymoon, a cozy one-bedroom in a decent neighborhood. That's when we started our saving plan for our own place. We decided to make it into a friendly competition, each of us putting money into separate accounts to see who could save more for the down payment. At first, it was fun. We'd compare takeout menus to find the best deals, have movie nights at home instead of going out, and cook elaborate meals together to avoid expensive restaurants. But about 3 months in, Tom started getting restless. "We're turning into an old married couple already," he complained one evening. "We're too young to live like hermits." I tried to remind him of our goals, showing him how much we'd already saved. "Think about it, in a few years, we could have our own place. Wouldn't that be worth it?" He would nod and seem to understand, but then Marcus started inviting him out for guys' nights on Fridays. At first, I was worried, but Marcus assured me he'd keep an eye on Tom. I believed him. After all, who better to trust with my husband than my own brother? And Tom would always come home in a better mood after these outings, more affectionate and understanding about our saving goals. So I learned to accept it, even look forward to having some quiet time to myself on Friday nights. A year into our marriage, I was feeling pretty good about our progress. My savings account was growing steadily. I had managed to put away just over $30,000. I had no idea how much Tom had saved. We'd kept that part of our competition private, but I hoped he was doing as well as I was. It was a Thursday evening when Tom dropped his fishing trip bombshell. "Marcus and I are thinking of going fishing this weekend," he announced over dinner. His friend has a cabin up at Lake Webster. I looked up from my pasta, surprised. "This weekend? I thought we could finally have some time together. You've been working late all week." "Come on, Gil," he grinned, his eyes lighting up like a kid at Christmas. "I haven't been fishing in ages. It'll be fun. Just us guys, some beers, maybe catch something worth bragging about." As if on cue, there was a knock at our door. Marcus burst in. He had a key for emergencies, though I was starting to question the wisdom of that decision. "Little sister," he boomed, spreading his arms wide. Please let your wonderful husband come fishing with me this weekend." He dropped to his knees dramatically in front of my chair. "I promise I'll take good care of him. No wild parties, no crazy stunts, just 2 guys trying to outsmart some fish." I couldn't help but laugh. "Get up, you idiot. You're 40, not 4. "Not until you say yes," he insisted, giving me his best puppy dog eyes, the same ones that had gotten him out of trouble countless times when we were kids. They left early Saturday morning, loading the car with fishing gear and a cooler full of supplies. I spent most of that morning cleaning the apartment, trying to keep busy, but by afternoon I was climbing the walls with boredom. That's when I had an idea. Marcus's girlfriend Sarah and I had become pretty good friends over the past year. She was smart, funny, and seemed to genuinely make my brother happy. Maybe she'd want to go shopping. I could justify a small splurge from my savings for some girl time. I pulled out my phone and dialed her number. She picked up on the third ring. "Hey Sarah, it's Jillian. Listen, the boys are off fishing, so I was wondering if you'd like to go shopping? Maybe grab some lunch?" There was a pause on the other end. "Fishing? Marcus isn't fishing. He's here with me at my place. We're getting ready to drive to my parents' house for the weekend. He's actually in the next room right now." My blood ran cold. In the background, I could hear my brother's voice. "Who's that, babe?" "Just my friend Lucy," Sarah replied, her voice slightly muffled. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, as the implications of what I'd just learned began to sink in. My husband and my brother had lied to me. But why? Where was Tom really going? "Sarah," I whispered, "please don't tell Marcus about this call. I need to figure something out. Just, please?" "Of course," she promised. "Are you okay?" "I don't know, I'll call you later." I hung up before my voice could break. For several minutes, I just sat there on our bed, my mind racing. Tom's laptop was on his desk, humming quietly in sleep mode. We had always been open with each other about passwords, or at least, I thought we had been. His was simple, his mother's birth date. I'd teased him about being too predictable, about needing better security. Now, that predictability was working in my favor. My hands trembled as I opened the laptop and typed in the password. His social media accounts were still logged in, he'd always been careless about that too. And then I saw her name, Rebecca. The message thread was extensive, going back months. With each scroll, each message I read, I felt my world crumbling around me. "Can't wait to see you this weekend, baby. Your wife really bought the fishing story?" "Yeah, my brother-in-law's got my back. He's a legend." "Ha, she's so clueless. Must be nice having such a trusting wife." They had been meeting almost every other weekend. Hotels, her apartment, even weekend trips disguised as work conferences or guys' outings. The level of detail, the casual cruelty of their jokes about me, the intimate photographs they shared, it made me physically sick. But worse was yet to come. There was a separate message thread with Marcus. My brother, protector, best friend since childhood. "She totally bought it again," Tom had written just yesterday. "Your sister's as gullible as ever." "Huh," Marcus replied. "Gil's always been a bit slow. Remember when we were kids and I convinced her that ice cream grew on trees? She's never gotten any smarter. You're the best wingman ever, bro." Rebecca says hi, BTW. Says thanks for covering with Sarah too. Anytime, what are brothers for? Besides, this is way more fun than actually hanging out with my boring sister. Hit me up when you're back, those strip club girls from last month have been asking about us. The messages went on and on. Plans for their guys' nights, detailed accounts of their visits to strip clubs, discussions about various women they'd met. Not only had Marcus been covering for Tom's affair, but he'd been actively participating in a lifestyle that would destroy Sarah if she ever found out. I read about how they laughed at my careful saving plans, how they mocked my dreams of owning a home. They joked about how I'd probably end up paying for everything anyway, since I was such a sucker. My own brother had called me stupid, naive, boring. The same brother who used to chase away bullies when we were kids, who'd held my hand at Dad's surgery 2 years ago, who'd cried at my wedding. The room was spinning. I ran to the bathroom and threw up, my whole body shaking. When I could finally stand again, I went back to the laptop. With methodical precision, I forwarded every damning message to my email account. Every cruel joke, every planned deception, every piece of evidence of their betrayal. I spent Saturday night in a strange, calm state of rage, methodically researching apartments and making calls. By Sunday morning, I had secured a furnished one-bedroom across town, paid the deposit from my savings, and signed the lease electronically. Tom came home around 3 in the afternoon, his face flushed and happy. He was carrying a convenience store bag with a few frozen fish inside, a pathetic attempt at maintaining his lie. "Hey, babe," he called out cheerfully. "You should have seen the ones that got away." I was sitting at the kitchen table, my laptop open in front of me. Without a word, I turned it toward him. On the screen was his conversation with Rebecca, including their plans for this weekend's rendezvous. "You know what's funny?" I said, my voice eerily calm. "I actually expected you to at least try to apologize." He straightened up, his expression hardening. "Why should I? You want to know the truth? You've become boring, Jillian. All you care about is saving money and planning for the future. Where's the fun? Where's the excitement? Even Marcus says." "Even Marcus says what?" I cut him off. "That I'm stupid? Naive? That I'm such a sucker for believing my husband and brother would actually be honest with me? Look," he sighed, running his hand through his hair, "maybe this is for the best. We're clearly wanting different things." "You're right," I interrupted again, standing up. "I wanted a marriage, you wanted a convenience." I grabbed my pre-packed suitcase from behind the couch. "I'm filing for divorce." "Don't worry about your precious savings, you can keep them. Though I doubt there's much left after all those strip clubs and hotel rooms." I spent the afternoon moving my essential belongings to the new apartment. It was small but clean, with basic furniture and a view of a small park. My savings, the money I'd been setting aside for our future, would now be my fresh start fund. That evening, I drove to my parents' house for their regular Sunday dinner. I knew Marcus and Sarah would be there, they always were after their weekends with her parents. Mom was setting the table when I arrived. Dad was in his usual armchair, and Marcus and Sarah were on the couch, looking like the perfect couple. "There's my girl," Mom smiled. "We missed you at lunch yesterday." "Yeah, about that." I looked directly at Marcus. "How your weekend covering for Tom's affair was, Marcus?" The room went dead silent. Marcus's face turned white. "What are you talking about?" Dad demanded. I pulled out my phone and started reading the messages aloud. The crude jokes, the strip club visits, the careful coordination of lies. With each word, Sarah's face grew more horrified. When I finished, she turned to Marcus, tears in her eyes. "Is this true?" He couldn't even look at her. "Sarah, please." The sound of her palm connecting with his cheek echoed through the room. "We're done," she choked out. "Everything, we're done." She grabbed her purse and ran out, the front door slamming behind her. After Sarah left, I expected my parents to be shocked, angry, disappointed in Marcus. Instead, my mother burst into tears, not for me, but for him. "Look what you've done," she cried, rushing to comfort Marcus, who sat with his head in his hands. "Your brother's relationship is ruined." I stared at her in disbelief. "Are you serious right now? Did you hear anything I just said? About how he helped Tom cheat on me? About the strip clubs? The lies?" "Oh, Jillian," Dad sighed, shaking his head. "Boys will be boys. You're making a mountain out of a molehill. Tom was just blowing off some steam, and Marcus was being a good friend." A good friend? I felt like I'd stepped into some bizarre parallel universe. "He helped my husband cheat on me. He lied to my face for months. And now you've destroyed his relationship with Sarah," Mom snapped. "Was that really necessary? Couldn't you have handled this privately?" Marcus lifted his head, his eyes red but dry. "Yeah, sis, real classy move. You just had to drag everyone into this, didn't you?" I looked between them, my mother stroking Marcus's hair like he was a wounded child, my father giving me that disappointed look he'd perfected over the years, and my brother, playing the victim as he had his entire life. In that moment, something inside me broke and reformed, harder and colder than before. "You know what? You're right. I should have known better than to expect any of you to take my side. Marcus has always been the golden child, hasn't he? He can do no wrong. Well, congratulations, you can have each other. I walked out of my childhood home that night and didn't look back. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly quick. Tom tried to claim half of my savings, arguing they were marital assets. We agreed to save together, he said in mediation, trying to sound reasonable. It was our joint plan for our future. But even his parents, who'd stayed out of the whole mess, told him to drop it. Don't make yourself look worse than you already do, his mother had said sharply. He withdrew his claim the next day. From mutual friends, I heard that Marcus and Tom were still thick as thieves. Without Sarah to keep him in check, Marcus had fully embraced the single life again. They were regulars at every bar and club in town, living it up like college freshmen instead of grown men in their 30s. Their social media was full of party pictures, groups of girls, and drunken adventures, not that I looked often, but word got back to me. Funny how clarity comes when you strip everything away. Without the distractions of a failing marriage or family drama, I could finally focus on what I wanted. And what I wanted was to succeed. I volunteered for every challenging project that came through TradeSync Solutions. The ones other managers avoided because they were too complex, too risky, or too time-consuming, I took them all. I stayed late, came in early, and poured every ounce of my energy into making each project exceptional. My first major success came with the Anderson account, a client everyone had written off as impossible to please. I restructured their entire trading framework, created new reporting systems, and increased their profitability by 47% in the first quarter. The CEO himself called to praise my work. That success led to bigger projects. I developed a new risk assessment protocol that saved the company millions in potential losses. I streamlined our international trading processes, reducing transaction times by 60%. Each victory built upon the last, and people started to notice. Jillian, my boss called me in one day, how would you feel about joining the management team? We need someone with your vision. The promotion came with a corner office and a salary that made my eyes water. I celebrated by buying myself a sleek black Mercedes, not the most practical choice, perhaps, but I wanted something that would remind me every day of how far I'd come. 6 months later, I closed on my dream apartment, a 2-bedroom condo in the city's most desirable neighborhood. The mortgage payments were steep, but I could handle them. Every night, I would stand on my balcony overlooking the city lights, feeling proud of what I'd built on my own. I hadn't spoken to my family in all this time. No birthday calls, no holiday gatherings, no Sunday dinners. Sometimes I'd see their numbers on my phone, but I never answered. The wounds were still too raw, the betrayal too fresh. Then, on a random Tuesday evening, as I was reviewing quarterly projections in my new home office, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and few people had my new address. Through the security camera, I saw my parents standing there, looking older and more tired than I remembered. For a moment, I considered not answering. But something in their posture, the way Mom kept wringing her hands, how Dad's shoulders slumped, made me buzz them up. Jillian, Mom started as soon as I opened the door, you look wonderful. What do you want? My voice was cool, professional, the same tone I used in difficult client meetings. They exchanged glances before Dad spoke. It's about Marcus. We were wrong about him. About everything. They told me how Marcus had spiraled after Sarah left him. How his friendship with Tom had turned toxic, endless partying, drinking, hooking up with random women. How he'd started showing up to work hungover, then drunk. 2 formal warnings, one for being intoxicated at his desk, another for no showing an important client meeting. He's been fired, Mom said, her voice breaking. His references are terrible. No one will hire him. He's living in his old room now. He has no money, no prospects. What exactly do you expect me to do about this? I asked, leaning against my kitchen counter. The marble was cool against my palms, a small luxury I'd chosen for myself when renovating. Mom's eyes lit up with hope at my question. Well, sweetheart, we know you're in management now. At such a prestigious company. We were thinking, Dad continued, maybe you could find a position for him? Something suitable. With a good salary. It doesn't have to be anything too demanding. A laugh escaped my lips before I could stop it. Let me get this straight. You want me to risk my professional reputation, which I built from scratch, to give a cushy job to the brother who betrayed me? The same brother who helped destroy my marriage? Jillian, that was 2 years ago, Mom pleaded. People make mistakes. Mistakes? I straightened up, my voice deadly calm. A mistake is forgetting to buy milk. A mistake is being late for dinner. What Marcus did, that was a choice. Multiple choices, actually. He chose to cover for Tom's affairs. He chose to mock me behind my back. He chose his friendship with my cheating ex-husband over his own sister. He's family, Dad argued, his face reddening. Family forgives. Really? Where was this family loyalty when I needed it? When I showed you proof of what they'd done to me. You sided with him then, remember? You're being unreasonable, Mom snapped. If you don't help your brother, we'll disinherit you. Everything will go to Marcus. I looked around my apartment, at the art I'd chosen, the furniture I'd bought, the life I'd built without their help. Then I laughed again, genuinely this time. I don't need or want anything from you. I think it's time for you to leave. I walked to the door and held it open. I have an early meeting tomorrow. They tried to argue more, but I simply stood there, door open, waiting. Finally, they left, Mom in tears, Dad muttering about ungrateful daughters. As I closed the door behind them, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Through the window, I watched them get into their aging Volvo, the same car they'd had since I was in college. I thought about Marcus in his childhood bedroom, probably nursing another hangover, waiting for someone else to solve his problems, like they always had. Last I heard, he was doing odd jobs around the neighborhood, mowing lawns, painting fences, anything to scrape together drinking money. Tom had eventually grown tired of partying with a broke friend and moved on. Karma, as they say, is a patient visitor. I poured myself a glass of wine, an expensive Bordeaux I'd bought to celebrate my last successful project, and walked out onto my balcony. The city stretched out before me, lights twinkling like stars fallen to earth. Below, I could see my Mercedes in its reserved parking spot, a symbol of everything I'd achieved on my own. Some might call me cold for turning my back on family. But family isn't just about blood, it's about trust, respect, and loyalty. Those who truly love you don't betray you, mock you, or try to manipulate you. They stand by you, support you, and celebrate your successes. My earliest memories are filled with the warmth of my father's smile and the comfort of our small rented apartment. I'm Carla, and until I was 13, my life was nothing but ordinary, in the best possible way. My dad, James, was the kind of father who made everything an adventure. Even though we lived in a modest apartment, he turned our tiny balcony into a fairy garden and our living room into a fort during rainy weekends. Mom, Sarah, was different, more reserved, always dreaming of a bigger house and a grander life. But back then, their differences seemed to balance each other out perfectly. Carla, sweetie, would you like to spend the weekend at Grandpa's? Mom would often ask, and I'd jump at the chance. Not because I didn't want to be home, but because Grandpa Richard's house was like a second home to me. It was this beautiful 2-story Victorian with creaking wooden floors and endless corners to explore. Your mother needs her alone time with your father, Grandpa would explain with a knowing smile when I'd arrive at his doorstep. And I need my time with my favorite granddaughter. I was a perceptive child, more than the adults around me realized. I understood that Mom sometimes needed space, that she and Dad had their own relationship to nurture. It didn't hurt me, if anything, it made me feel mature. Plus, those weekends with Grandpa were precious. He'd tell me stories about Dad's childhood, teach me about managing money, he was a retired bank manager, and make the best pancakes in the world. You know, Carla, he told me once while we were having breakfast on his porch, your mother dreams of a house like this. But you know what's more important than a big house? A home filled with love. I nodded, understanding even at that young age. Our apartment might have been small, but it was filled with love. Dad would come home from his job at the insurance company, swing me around in his arms, and pepper Mom with kisses until she laughed despite herself. Those moments made our tiny space feel infinite. But life has a way of changing when you least expect it. I was 13 when Dad started losing weight rapidly. At first, he joked about it, saying he was finally getting in shape, but his eyes told a different story. The doctor's visits became more frequent, and Mom's face grew increasingly worried. It's just a phase, Dad would say, ruffling my hair weakly. I'll be back to my old self in no time. But he wasn't. The disease, aggressive pancreatic cancer, consumed him like a wildfire. Within months, my strong, vibrant father became a shadow of himself. I watched helplessly as Mom tried to hold everything together, but I could see her crumbling inside. The last conversation I had with Dad is forever etched in my memory. He was lying in his hospital bed, his hand barely strong enough to hold mine. "Take care of your mom for me, princess," he whispered. "And let Grandpa guide you. He's wiser than all of us combined." The year after Dad's death felt like living in a fog. Mom spiraled into such deep depression that she could barely look at me. I guess I reminded her too much of him. Thank goodness for Grandpa Richard. He became my rock, my safe harbor in the storm that our lives had become. Living in Grandpa's house wasn't just a temporary solution anymore, it became my new normal. Every morning, I'd wake up in what used to be Dad's old room, surrounded by his childhood photos and trophies. Grandpa made sure I kept up with school, helped me with homework, and tried his best to fill the void both my parents had left, one through death, the other through grief. Mom would call occasionally, but her voice always seemed distant, detached. Her visits were even rarer, quick stops where she'd barely meet my eyes, before rushing off again. I learned to stop expecting more. Then, exactly 1 year and 2 months after Dad's death, everything changed. Mom showed up at Grandpa's door one sunny Saturday morning, and I almost didn't recognize her. Gone was the grieving widow in black, replaced by someone wearing a bright yellow dress and sporting a new haircut. Her face was glowing with unhappiness. "Carla, sweetie, pack your things. You're coming home," she announced, bouncing on her heels like a teenager. I looked at Grandpa, confused. He seemed just as surprised as I was. The drive back to our apartment was filled with Mom's cheerful chatter about everything and nothing. It was like sitting next to a stranger who happened to look like my mother. But the real shock came when we walked through our apartment door. There, in our small living room, stood a tall man and a girl who looked about 3 years younger than me. They both smiled awkwardly as Mom practically danced to their side. "Carla, meet Robert and his daughter Emma. Robert is my fiancé, and Emma will be your new sister. We're getting married soon," Mom beamed, clutching Robert's arm. The room started spinning. "What? When did this happen?" "Oh, we've been dating for a while now," Mom waved her hand dismissively. "I didn't tell anyone about our relationship. You know how people can get jealous and judgmental. It was better this way." I stumbled to my old room, barely registering that it had been redecorated. With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone and called Grandpa. He answered on the first ring. "Mom has a fiancé," I whispered into the phone. "She's getting married and didn't tell anyone. There's a man here, and his daughter." Grandpa arrived within 20 minutes. I could hear the conversation from my room as he confronted Mom. "Sarah, how could you do this without telling anyone? Without telling your own daughter?" "Dad, I'm happy for the first time in forever." Mom's voice was defensive. "I've decided to start fresh, to live again. James would want that. He wouldn't want me to waste away in depression forever." There was a long pause before Grandpa spoke again, his voice heavy with resignation. "I hope you'll be happy, Sarah. Just, don't forget you have a daughter who needs you too." The 3 months before the wedding were like living in some twisted alternate reality. Our small apartment felt even more cramped with 4 people instead of 2, but that wasn't the worst part. What really got to me was watching Emma, my soon-to-be stepsister, wrap my mother around her finger. "Mom, can you help me with my hair?" Emma would say, and my mother would drop everything, including our conversation, to assist her. The way she said "Mom" made my skin crawl, especially since she'd only known my mother for a few months. Mom seemed blind to everything except Emma. When Emma mentioned she loved ballet, Mom immediately signed her up for private lessons, something I'd begged for years ago but was told we couldn't afford. When Emma complained about her old phone being too slow, Mom bought her the latest iPhone model. When Emma wanted to redecorate her side of the bedroom we now shared, Mom took her shopping and spent hundreds of dollars on new bedding, curtains, and decorations. "Your sister needs to feel welcome here," Mom would say whenever I tried to point out the disparity in treatment. "Stepsister," I'd correct her. "And I need to feel welcome too." She'd just shake her head and walk away. The wedding day itself was a modest affair at a local venue, but Mom glowed with happiness. I stood there in my bridesmaid dress, watching as she fussed over Emma's hair and makeup, barely sparing me a glance. Throughout the ceremony and reception, Mom kept Emma close, holding her hand, introducing her to everyone as "my beautiful daughter." I might as well have been a waitress for all the attention I received. Grandpa gave them a check for $5,000 as a wedding gift, a generous amount by any standard. But I overheard Mom's reaction when she cornered him by the restrooms. "Really, Dad? A check?" she hissed, her face flushed from champagne and anger. "I was counting on you giving us your house. We're a proper family now, we need the space. That apartment is too small for 4 people. Grandpa remained calm, though I could see the disappointment in his eyes. "Sarah, you're rushing everything. First the sudden engagement, now this? That house isn't just property to be handed over on a whim. Besides, it's where Carla spends half her time now." "Oh, so that's it? You're playing favorites now?" "No, I'm being practical. And maybe you should be too." I slipped away before they could notice me, but the conversation haunted me. My mother had changed so much that I barely recognized her anymore. She'd created this new perfect family in her mind, with Emma as the star child and Robert as the ideal husband. There didn't seem to be any room left for me. So I did what any unwanted person would do. I spent more and more time at Grandpa's house. At least there, I didn't have to pretend to be happy about being replaced. For years have passed since that moment, and I was about to graduate from high school. Living in that apartment had become a masterclass in avoiding conflict. I'd learned to be quiet, to take up as little space as possible, to spend most of my time either in my room or at Grandpa's. One evening, during our weekly family dinner, another exercise in pretending we were one big happy family, I decided to share my plans for the future. "I've been accepted to State University," I announced, trying to keep my voice steady. "I want to study finance and business management." The silence that followed was deafening. Mom put down her fork, exchanged a look with Robert, and cleared her throat. "Actually, Carla, I think it would be better if you started working after graduation. College isn't necessary for everyone." I stared at her, bewildered. "What are you talking about?" "Dad set up a college fund for me before he died. He always wanted me to get higher education." Mom shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "About that fund, Robert and I have been talking, and we think it would be better to save that money for Emma's education. She's incredibly talented, you know. Top of her class in everything. She'll need a good university education to reach her full potential." Robert nodded sagely. "Emma has shown remarkable aptitude in her studies. It would be the right thing to do, Carla. You could work for a few years, save up, and then go to college if you still want to." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "The college fund, the last gift my father had arranged for me, they wanted to take that too?" "That money is mine," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "Dad left it specifically for MY education. You can't just give it to Emma." "Don't be selfish, Carla. Mom's eyes filled with tears. Emma is your sister. Stepsister. I stood up so quickly, my chair fell backward. And that money is the last thing I have from Dad. You've given her everything else, my room, your attention, your love. But you can't have this. I won't let you take it. How dare you? Mom was crying now, but I could see the manipulation in her tears. After everything we've done for you. Emma needs. Emma needs? What about what I need? What about what Dad wanted for me? The argument ended with doors slamming and tears, mostly Mom's, as she wailed about my selfishness. After that night, the apartment became even more hostile. No one spoke to me unless absolutely necessary. Emma would smirk whenever she passed me in the hallway, and Robert wouldn't even look in my direction. When graduation day came, I wasn't surprised to find only Grandpa in the audience. He cheered loud enough for 4 people when they called my name, and his proud smile meant more to me than anything my new family could have offered. That evening, I packed everything I owned into 3 cardboard boxes and my old suitcase. Grandpa helped me load them into his car. Your room is always ready for you, sweetheart, he said as we drove away from the apartment. Always has been, always will be. I didn't look back as we left. There was nothing there for me anymore. College life became my escape. I threw myself into my studies, determined to make my father and Grandpa proud. The business and finance courses fascinated me, and I found myself excelling in ways that would have made Dad smile. Every evening, I'd call Grandpa to share what I'd learned. Tell me again about derivatives, he'd say, even though he knew more about finance than my professors. I love hearing you explain it. But as my college years progressed, I noticed changes in Grandpa's voice during our calls. He got tired more easily, and his usual sharp wit sometimes seemed dulled. During my visits home, I caught him wincing when he stood up or rubbing his chest when he thought I wasn't looking. It's just age catching up with me, he'd say whenever I asked about his health. Nothing to worry about, sweetheart. But I did worry. I started calling him twice a day instead of once, and I'd drive home every weekend I could, not just on holidays. We'd sit in his kitchen, drinking tea and talking about everything and nothing, just like we used to. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at me with such intense love that it made my throat tight. It was the middle of my final semester when Mom called. I almost didn't answer, it was the first time she'd called in 4 years. But something made me pick up. Grandpa died last night, she said, her voice flat and emotionless. The funeral is on Thursday at 2 p.m. Hartford Funeral Home. The phone slipped from my hand. I don't remember much of what happened next, just that my roommate found me curled up on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Thursday came too quickly, and not quickly enough. The funeral home was exactly the kind of place Grandpa would have chosen, understated but elegant, with large windows letting in natural light. I arrived early, my black dress feeling too tight, my skin too sensitive, everything wrong, because Grandpa wasn't there to make it right. I expected to see Mom and her family, but they weren't there. Instead, Mr. Harrison, Grandpa's friend from his banking days, was organizing everything. They're running a bit late, he said when I asked. Your mother called to say they'd be delayed. The service was beautiful, filled with people from Grandpa's life sharing stories about his kindness, his integrity, his humor. I sat in the front row, alone with my grief, until halfway through the service when I heard the back door open. Mom swept in with Robert and Emma, all in perfectly coordinated black outfits. They took seats in the far back, and Mom didn't even glance in my direction. Her face was set in a mask of appropriate grief, but her eyes were already darting around the room, assessing, calculating. I turned back to face the front, my tears now burning with both grief and anger. Even here, even now, she couldn't acknowledge me. Couldn't put aside her pettiness for one day to mourn her own father. After the funeral service, I drove to Grandpa's house, my home for the past 4 years, only to stop short at the sight that greeted me. There, scattered across the front lawn like worthless debris, were garbage bags filled with my belongings. My clothes, my books, my photo albums, everything from my room had been unceremoniously thrown out. Some bags had split open, spilling my life across the grass. With trembling hands, I tried my key in the front door. It wouldn't turn. The lock had been changed. I was still standing there, key uselessly in hand, when the door swung open. Mom stood in the doorway, wearing the same black dress from the funeral, but now with an expression of triumph rather than grief. "Oh good, you're here to collect your things," she said, as if she was doing me a favor. "This is my house now. Dad's finally gone, and as his only child, I'm the rightful heir. I've already had the locks changed, we're moving in tonight." I stared at her, unable to process the cruelty of it all. "You couldn't even wait until after the funeral? These are my things, my home." "No, this is my home now," she cut me off sharply. "And you better take your stuff quickly, or it's going in the dumpster. I need to clear the space for Emma's things." She smiled coldly. "She's getting your old room, by the way. She's always wanted a bigger bedroom." I felt numb as I gathered my belongings, stuffing everything back into the torn bags, trying to collect the scattered photos of Dad and Grandpa from where they'd fallen in the grass. My mother stood in the doorway the entire time, watching me like a security guard, making sure I didn't try to steal anything. The drive back to my college dorm was a blur of tears and disbelief. My roommate helped me carry everything up, not asking questions when she saw my state. A week later, I received a call from a law firm. "Miss Johnson? This is Mr. Anderson from Anderson and Partners Law Firm. I'm your grandfather's notary. We need you to come in for the reading of his will. Would Thursday at 10 a.m. work for you?" I agreed, though I couldn't see the point. Mom had made it clear she was the heir to everything. When I arrived at the notary's office that Thursday, Mom, Robert, and Emma were already there, seated like royalty in the leather chairs. Emma was examining her manicure, while Robert scrolled through his phone. Mom's eyes narrowed when she saw me. "What are you doing here?" she asked loudly enough for everyone in the office to hear. "You're clearly not needed for this. We're handling family business." Mr. Anderson adjusted his glasses and began reading from the document in front of him. "I, Richard James Mitchell, being of sound mind and body, declare this to be my last will and testament." He started with the formal language, but I saw Mom already smiling triumphantly. That smile froze when Mr. Anderson continued, "To my beloved granddaughter, Carla Johnson, I leave my house at 1542 Oak Street, along with all its contents, and my entire savings account containing $475,000. The room went deadly silent for a moment. Then Mom's voice shattered it. "What? This can't be right." She snatched the document from Mr. Anderson's hands, her eyes scanning frantically. "Where's my part? I'm his daughter." Mr. Anderson calmly retrieved the will. "Mrs. Waters, your father's wishes are quite clear. He leaves everything to Miss Carla Johnson. There is no provision for you in the will." "This is impossible." Mom's face had turned scarlet. "She manipulated him. She poisoned him against me. I'll sue. I'll contest this will." "The will is ironclad," Mr. Anderson stated firmly. "Your father had it properly witnessed and notarized 6 months ago. He was of completely sound mind, as attested by his doctor. Any attempt to contest it would be futile and expensive." Mom's strategy suddenly shifted. The rage in her eyes transformed into tears as she turned to me. "Carla, sweetie, please," she pleaded, her voice honey-sweet now. "We've already given up our apartment. We moved everything out yesterday. We have nowhere to go. You can't just throw us out on the street. We're family." I stood up, holding the folder Mr. Anderson had just handed me. Inside were the deed to the house, ownership transfer documents, and all the legal paperwork confirming my ownership of the property. "Family?" I asked quietly. "Like how you threw my belongings onto the lawn before Grandpa was even in his grave? Like how you tried to steal my college fund? Like how you've treated me for the past 4 years? That was different. We were "This is your problem, not mine," I cut her off, turning to leave. "I suggest you start looking for a new apartment." I drove straight to Grandpa's house, my house now, but I couldn't get in. I pulled out my phone and called a locksmith, explaining the situation. When he arrived, I showed him my freshly notarized ownership documents. "I'm the legal owner of this house," I explained, showing him the paperwork. "I need you to open these locks and then change them to new ones. I want to be the only one with the keys." As the locksmith worked, I gathered up everything that belonged to Mom, Robert, and Emma, all the clothes they'd already unpacked, their toiletries from the bathrooms, Emma's posters she'd already stuck to my old bedroom wall. I loaded it all into garbage bags, just as they'd done with my things. When the locksmith finished and handed me the new keys, I dragged all their bags onto the front porch and arranged them neatly. The symmetry of the situation wasn't lost on me. Their belongings now sat where mine had been just days ago. As the sun began to set, I heard the familiar sound of Mom's car pulling into the driveway. I watched through the living room window, Grandpa's favorite spot to read his morning paper, as their reactions played out exactly as I'd expected. "What is this?" Mom's shriek could be heard clearly through the closed windows. "Our things? All our things are outside." I opened the door, but stood firmly in the doorway as they approached. Mom's face was red with fury, Robert looked like he'd swallowed something sour, and Emma was already crying theatrical tears. "How dare you?" Mom stormed up the porch steps. "We live here now. You can't do this to us." "Actually, I can. This is my house now, legally and rightfully. You need to take your belongings and leave." "We have nowhere to go," Emma wailed. "You should have thought about that before giving up your apartment," I replied coolly. "Not my problem." Mom tried to push past me into the house, but I stood my ground. "Move, Carla. This is ridiculous. This is my father's house." "No, it's my house now. And if you don't leave immediately with your things, I'm calling the police to report you for trespassing. After that, all these bags go straight to the dumpster." I pulled out my phone. "Your choice, Mom. Just like you gave me a choice about my things a few days ago, remember?" The next few minutes were filled with cursing and threats as they gathered their bags. Mom alternated between crying and screaming about how unfair it all was, while Emma kept saying I'd regret this. Robert muttered under his breath about contesting the will. As they loaded the last bag into their car, Mom turned to me one final time. "You're no daughter of mine. Your father would be ashamed of you." I smiled sadly. "No, Mom. Dad would be proud that I finally stood up for myself. Goodbye." I watched them drive away, their car disappearing around the corner. That was 6 months ago. I'm in my final semester now, about to graduate with honors. The house is being rented to a lovely young family. Their monthly rent payments are helping me build my savings, just as Grandpa would have wanted. I found his letter in the study safe that first night, after everyone left. "My dearest Carla," it began, "if you're reading this, it means you've already dealt with your mother's reaction to my will. I'm sorry I had to put you through that, but I knew Sarah too well. I knew what she would try to do. You have your father's integrity and my business sense, use them both wisely. The house is yours to do with as you please. Just promise me you'll keep the family photos in the attic. Some memories are worth keeping, even the painful ones." I kept that promise, along with the others I made to both him and Dad. I'm focusing on my future now, letting go of the past, but keeping the lessons it taught me. Sometimes family isn't who you're born to, sometimes it's who believes in you, who protects you, who helps you grow. Mom, Robert, and Emma still live somewhere in the city. I hear they found a new apartment eventually. They've tried to contact me a few times, usually when they need something, but I don't respond. Some chapters of our lives are better left closed.